Brett emailed and said he'll be 5 minutes late.
Okay. Do we want to wait the 5 minutes or start without him?
Probably. How many do we have?
We have 4. We only need 3 for a quorum.
Right.
I see everybody.
We could start and get rid of the administrative items.
Yeah, you
Yep,
could do
yep.
that.
Okay, we ready then? Okay, we'll call the Tremont Planning Board meeting of August 24th to order at 5:01. We have roll call, Lawson Wilson. And remember this, please unmute yourselves. You have to say here or whatever.
I am here, whatever.
Okay, thank you. Jeff Young,
Present.
Beth Gott,
Here,
myself, yes. And I guess Brett will be joining us soon. We have CEO Jesse Dunbar and recording secretary Jan Sprague. I believe it should be on here somewhere. Is
Yep.
that right, Jesse? Yep.
Jesse. Okay.
And members of the public. Okay. We don't have to worry about excused absences or unexcused absences. I don't see any reason to adjust the agenda unless somebody objects. And let's go on to the minutes of August 10th. And Beth, because some of this had to do with Acadia Wilderness, I think you should abstain from voting on this. And also you'll have to recuse yourself from any business concerning Acadia Wilderness.
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anybody see anything about the minutes they were concerned with? I had a question. Was this the meeting where we approved a motion for Beth to recuse herself from all business concerning Acadia Wilderness Lodge, or was that a previous meeting?
Previous meeting.
Oh, okay, okay. So much for my memory, huh? Okay, I don't see any issues. I'd like to thank Lawson for doing it. I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Motion and second to approve the minutes of hold on here.
August 10th.
August 10th.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Lawson,
Lawson, yes.
Aye.
Jeff,
Gott,
yes.
yes.
Myself, yes. Beth, you're gonna have to abstain.
Yep,
You can
abstain.
Yeah, and Beth will abstain. Okay.
And
Really like-
is Jesse, are you taking minutes today? Is Jan here?
Dan's here.
Oh, okay,
Jan's
great.
here, yeah.
Great.
I really like Brett to be here. Maybe he's trying to call in.
It's only 3 after 5, and he said 5 minutes, so we're
Well, let's give him a few minutes, okay?
Yeah.
Probably should have waited for him. Maybe somebody can entertain us with a story.
I'll report that the ocean is wonderful right now, and I recommend swimming while we can, because it's only for a couple of weeks when it's just right. So,
Where is Charlotte, the great white shark?
well, yeah, I thought about that sort of halfway through my swim, and I think my swim back towards shore was probably faster than my swim away from shore. Once I started getting in my head the idea that, like, oh right, there might be sharks in these waters.
Lawson, do you mind divulging where you find it comfortable to swim in the ocean around here?
The Algerian coast is
Okay, that's what's
comfortable and close, so it's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
On
That
a
would be my
sunny
choice
afternoon
as well,
like this. Yeah.
Mark, Diane just joined us, so you're aware.
Oh, good.
okay. Yes, I forgot about Diane. Good. Where is she on here?
She's probably way at the back, but you can click and drag her, Mark, up towards the front if you want.
Okay, I don't see her though.
You might have
Maybe click and
scrolled to your
drag.
second page.
Okay, how do I get to the second page?
Do you see
The
the
only-
arrows on either side? There's like a blue arrow that says 1 out of 2.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, Diane, hi, thank you. How do I drag her to the other page then, though?
If you just sort of drag her to the top left of that second page and then go back to the first page, she'll actually be on your first page too.
Yeah, there she is. Okay, hi, Diane. We're waiting, since you just
There
joined
she
us, we're waiting for Brett. He should be here just in a minute or two.
I need a lesson in Zoom.
Beth, are you on a computer or an iPad? Or something
iPad,
else?
iPad.
Yeah, that makes it, I'm less capable of giving you tips and advice on the
Oh,
iPad.
I see our major group, so I'm
Okay.
okay, I guess.
Yeah, that's what's useful.
I apologize, folks.
I think the phrase is patience is a virtue.
Yeah. Traffic has been absolutely horrendous.
Andy, you don't strike me as a person with a lot of patience, but maybe I'm wrong.
I haven't been historically. That's why my father tells me the story that his mother told him. Patience can do most anything. Just go ahead and try it. So I try it, and sometimes it works.
And other times it doesn't.
Yeah, but when your life is in a knot, patience will untie it.
Oh, gee. That was your mother's saying, huh?
My father's mother saying, my
Oh,
grandmother.
grandmother, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you think we should start, Jesse?
I
I
think
really want him, I really want him involved in this.
yeah, I think we should give it another couple of minutes.
Okay,
I would say preliminarily that it might be helpful for us to understand that we've had the opportunity to review the board's attorney's materials, and we're largely in agreement with what is stated in the memo. I think it provides a sensible guide for this evening, and we'll look forward to presenting the concept plan, but I'd rather have the opportunity for all board members to see the PowerPoint presentation. I would say, Jesse, each of Greg and me will need to share screen. So if it's possible to make us co-hosts so that we can do that efficiently, that would be great.
Is Greg on right
I
now?
haven't seen Greg.
I
I
see
think
there
I
is
think-
a Greg. I don't know if it's the right Greg, but there is somebody named Greg who's on.
Wrong, Greg.
Oh, okay. Wrong Greg. Good to know.
Jesse, you have a cell phone number for Brett?
Yep.
Want to ring him and see if he's getting close?
Mhm.
I was just thinking the same thing, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me? This is Amy Chow. I'm an attorney.
Yes, Ms. Chow,
And,
I can hear you, yes.
I just wanted to introduce myself, and while we're waiting, we can do this again, but I wanted to respond to a couple things that Andy Hamilton just mentioned with respect to Diane O'Connell's procedural memo, which the planning board has in front of it, I believe. And I just wanted to thank Diane and Andy both. They were gracious enough to meet on a Sunday night at my request to go over some of the procedural questions I had. And I hope that I'll have the opportunity to briefly address the board before any launch of any concept discussion. But I promise I won't go into lots of legal argumentation. But I would like to briefly address the board if that's permitted before you dive right into things. Thank you.
Andy, do you know if Greg is going to be on, or are you doing the presentation?
I'm certain Greg will be on. He was having a challenge with a password. I think it's just capital T R smaller case REMONT. So he may have been using all caps because that's what I experienced. So I've got the PowerPoint for Ms. Orcutt, and she's just going to say next slide once I bring it up. So that will be easy. And Greg's got a very short document he wants to share, and he'll be on by the time we get started.
And I saw Brett has joined us. Shall we roll along?
Okay, where's Brett? Okay, second page here.
He's on my first page.
Yeah, I'm here, guys. Sorry about that. 5 o'clock sometimes tough when you have a job. But sorry about that.
Well, thanks. Welcome aboard here, Brett.
Yeah, promises to be a good time.
Okay, I'm still trying to find you here so I can put you up the top of the screen.
If I keep talking, I think it should probably move me to somewhere where you can probably find me.
Oh, I see you now. We'll see if the tip works here.
For further preliminaries, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Hold on a second, Andy, okay? You know, patience is a virtue. You know, what did your grandmother tell you? Let's see here. Anyway, I don't have Brett right up handy. Okay, there he is. Okay,
Can you close?
page 2. Okay, we all set now? We were going to, I had discussed with Diane and with Jesse earlier today about a procedure for tonight and the order that we're going to go in before we get to any public hearing part of the meeting. And we're going to allow as Diane suggested in her memo, allow the applicant and their representatives to explain the concept plan, and then allow the opponent's counsel. Ms. Chell, is Mr. Katsifikas no longer involved? I know Mr. Pelleggi isn't.
That's correct. He has turned over his clients to me, and I also represent an additional number of abutters and concerned Tremont residents.
Okay.
But Mr.
And-
Katsifikas is no longer involved in this case.
Yep. Okay. And so then we'll have Ms. Chow respond and allow any rebuttal by the applicant. And board members can ask any questions throughout. I know that both Ms. Chow and Andy would like to make some initial statements. Please keep it brief. Andy, we'll take you first.
So I actually want to defer to Kenya Hopkins after noting that at my request, Tammy Smith, who you'll see on Zoom, is a court reporter, and she'll be keeping the record so a verbatim transcript can be provided for this meeting and future meetings. What I'd like to suggest is that Kenya, you start us off in just a moment. I'll just offer a few thoughts. And let me yield to you actually, Kenya, first, if you would, and then if you just hand it back to me, and then I'll.
Hold on one second, Andy. Okay. I thought Ms. Chow wanted to say something before we get into actually discussing the concept plan itself.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just as a matter of a point of order, what I think I heard you say is that the planning board would be discussing with its counsel, Attorney O'Connell, and with the town manager, the procedure that you're going to follow tonight. And so are you, if you're doing that first, I don't know if it would be appropriate for Attorney O'Connell to address, or summarize her memo and have there be a discussion of what procedure you intend to follow. And that's, once that's done, I'm happy to address the board very briefly with just a few comments. And I don't want to delay, the discussion of the concept plan that I think the planning board is prepared to hear from the.
Ms. Chow, I believe you misunderstood me.
Okay,
I've already discussed that with Mr. Dunbar and Ms. O'Connell. And what I just outlined is what we had arrived at. So what I just mentioned in terms of the order. So go ahead with what you wanted to say.
So I think under that order, I understand Ms. Chow wants to offer an objection. And I think she can do that as part of a brief response. I was confused as to whether you wanted us to start in. If you want counsel to address the board briefly in the context of this land use review, I'd actually like to have that opportunity to proceed, have Ms. Chow offer any objection, and then I'd have the opportunity to respond. So if I may, I'll be brief. What I wanted to say is that everything that happened last night before the select board is not part of tonight's proceeding. I think the planning board knows that. I'm certain Attorney O'Connell and Attorney Chow know that, but any question and any issues associated with moratorium has no place in the land use review that has been for a pending application pending since the March 2021 meeting, as Attorney O'Connell noted in her memo, and then you started a substantive review, which started the substantive review on April 27th. What I'd like to say is that applicants have due process rights under state and federal laws in this quasi-judicial review of a pending application. And we hope that we all conduct ourselves accordingly. We want the rights the applicants have to proceed under the current ordinances and under state and federal law, with a stage review under the ordinances. And I'm going to propose these 3 steps. Step 1 is tonight being a concept review as detailed in the board attorney's memo. And Cindy Orcutt will address that at a September 28th hearing date to be set for another confirming or check-in completeness review. You will see that Mr. Johnston will offer a very brief review of the checklist, showing those things that will need to be modified. There are less than 25% of the exhibits that will need to be modified. Everything else remains the same. And as to that 25% of the exhibits, each of the items shows that there's a reduction in resource use or impacts. For instance, traffic reduced, water required for the project reduced, stormwater required for the project reduced. Then in October, excuse me, let me just restate. So September 28 hearing date for a confirming or check-in completeness review, and because it should be brief and we'll have very limited items to review, we would notice September 28 for a public hearing. At least 21 days in advance is required under your ordinance, so that we could have a September 28th review of completeness and continue the substantive review of the same application that's been reviewed by the planning board with concept modifications. I would also emphasize that as the board hears from Acadia Wilderness Lodge team tonight, we trust that the board will keep in mind that their duties as outlined in Attorney O'Connell's memo and the options she suggests for the board and its chair. We ask those options be engaged with care, and those choices will be recorded since we've got the court reporter present. And we ask that the chair, as the chair has proposed by the order of presentation, follow the planning board bylaws, which sets forth specific procedures. Without further ado, I'd like to, once the attorneys are done, hand it off to Kenya Hopkins as co-owner of the project to introduce Cindy Orcutt. But I'll defer to Attorney Chow next.
Ms. Chow?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Amy Chow. As I mentioned before, I'm an attorney at Drummond Woodsum, and I represent a group of abutters and concerned town of Tremont residents and community members in connection with this matter and in connection with a petition for a moratorium, which I agree with Mr. Hamilton is not the subject of tonight's meeting. So I would like to just focus on one aspect of Ms. O'Connell's procedural memo, and then just make a couple observations and comments before you get right into it. I understand that on page 3 of her memo, Ms. O'Connell says, whether the board decides to have an informational public meeting or continue the substantive review hearing or wish to make some other determination, the applicant should be afforded the opportunity to present its new concept and address questions the board members may have prior to any decision being made as a matter of due process. And then she goes on to say that others can weigh in, including myself. And I just wanted to state for the record, first of all, that whatever this meeting is tonight, we do not believe it is a continuation of any public hearing of the first plan that was proposed by Acadia Wilderness Lodge. That was a different 154 RV unit proposal. And I don't think anyone is here, whether this is a public hearing or not, pretending that it is a continuation of that public hearing. Had we had the opportunity to hear Mr. Hamilton's and Mr. Johnson's request on July 27th to ask the board to continue the public hearing, we would have registered an objection then, because this cannot be a continuation of a public hearing on a plan that is a new concept plan that hasn't even been a completed plan and application. So I just want to renew that objection and not belabor it. But I also want to state for the record that whatever the board is doing tonight, I believe it is in the nature of an informational, informal review, because this is not yet a completed proposed plan. By admission, this is something that is not yet fully formed and fully cooked. And I understand that there are procedures in your ordinance that allow you to informally hear and dialogue with an applicant about a new concept plan, which is what you're going to do tonight. But because it's not a complete application yet, and because everyone has agreed, and there's no dispute that this new plan, which is very different from the first plan, is going to need to undergo completeness review by the planning board, this cannot be a public hearing over this new concept plan, because your ordinance at Article 7B3 says that a public hearing is only appropriate once a completeness determination has been made. And it's also true that whatever is happening tonight, if the planning board is going to be asking questions and dialoguing with the applicant, it cannot be a substantive review of this new concept plan, because your ordinance also dictates that you will not undertake substantive review of an application until it's complete. Your ordinance is quite clear about that. So again, I have no issue with proceeding forward with an informational discussion of the concept plan or with the other steps, frankly, that Mr. Hamilton has proposed with respect to a completeness determination in September. Whether a public hearing should be scheduled for September or October, I leave those decisions up to the board, of course. But tonight is not a continuation of the public hearing of the original plan, nor should it be considered a public hearing of a plan that In fairness, and we speak of due process, my clients and others in the community don't have really most of the details that this plan will outline. So I just wanted to make those statements for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell, do you want to respond to comments either by Mr. Hamilton or Ms. Chow?
Yes, I'd like to briefly respond.
I don't think your name is Ms. O'Connell, Andy,
No.
sorry.
You spoke of rebuttal earlier, and I thought you'd want to wait for my rebuttal before you ask for Ms. O'Connell's response.
Okay, go ahead, Andy.
No, I
But,
don't, we'll be back and forth all night at this rate with.
Yeah,
attorneys weighing in, it's
we gotta
fine.
move into it, yes.
Well, all I was going to suggest is a couple of things that I think are important. There are several shades of the word new, and there's no way that we could say that this concept plan isn't new in some respects. But the law court has recently addressed in a case decided on June 17th, the nature of the difference between charter changes, whether they're revision or amendments. The name of the case is City of Portland Fair Elections versus City of Portland. And they address the difference between a minor revision, minor amendment, and a wholesale revision. There's nothing about this golden retriever that is not still a golden retriever. It's a campground. The use has not changed. Rather, this golden retriever has shed some weight. This plan is substantially reduced. I think Attorney Chow gently misstated when she referred to this as 154 RV units plan. There never have been 154 RVs proposed. There were 72 RVs that were proposed. In any event, those are gone. And so we agree on a couple of things. Using the difference in the shades of new, what is new is that we have responded with modifications that have been sought by neighbors. And we've used a process of great listening and integrity in making those modifications.
Andy, if I may interrupt, I think we understand that.
Yep.
And maybe we ought to move along here. I would like to hear from Ms. O'Connell, though.
Certainly, I'll yield.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening to everyone on board. The procedure set out, I don't think that's controversial here. Attorney Chow was just lodging her objection to this proceeding as a public review hearing of the initial application. And from what I'm hearing from the chairperson is that this is more of an informational presentation. And I think it's going to proceed along with that course.
And I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood. We do not agree with the notion that this is a new application. We believe it's a modification of an existing application, the type of modifications that applicants make all the time. And so with that reservation, I find it fine to call it an informational meeting at this moment. At some point, we need to discuss when a substantive review that's already started will again continue. And so with that said, I think Attorney O'Connell points out correctly, we can style this as informational at this point. The applicant just wanted an opportunity to get the planning board up to speed with a concept plan that modified the earlier application. So happy to yield to you, Mr. Chairman. And
Okay, thank you, Andy. That being said, why don't we move along to a discussion about that concept plan itself? And I believe that you're going to have Kenya start. Is that correct?
Yes, if Kenya could introduce the team and Cynthia Orcutt, that'd be great.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say thank you to the planning board first for permitting our team to present our modified plan this evening. We have worked with our neighbors very hard with honesty and integrity since we last met with you in April. The work that we have done has steered us to modify our original plan, developing a plan that better fits within our neighborhood. We are very interested in our team presenting this plan to you this evening, and we thank you so much for your consideration. Our team tonight consists of Greg Johnston, who is our project engineer, Cynthia Orcutt, who is our landscape architect, and Andy Hamilton and John Pottle, who are our project attorneys. At this time, I'd like to yield the floor to Cynthia Orcutt, who will lead our presentation from tonight forward. Cynthia.
Great, thank you, Kenya. Thank you so much for allowing us to present this plan. I am not a lawyer, but I am a planner. And I can tell you that this is how planning works. It is oftentimes the case where you start with one plan and you have input from people that have concerns and you modify your plan. In fact, not doing so oftentimes is really bad planning. In this case, we have had good planning, and I would like to go through that process with you this evening. Andy, can you put up the PowerPoint, please?
Jesse continues to say that only the host can share content. So can you make me co-host?
Does it still say that?
Yes. Thank you, Jesse.
Great. Okay, thank you, Andy. So this evening we are going to look at this concept plan, and we're going to highlight how we have modified the plan that was originally presented to you over the course of the last several months. Next slide, Andy. Please. Great. Just kind of a brief review of the timeline, which is part of the process. We submitted the original plan to the Tremont Planning Board in January. In April, a couple things happened. There was a site walk with the planning board, and dozens of letters of concern were submitted to the planning board. Pretty much 100% expressing concern about the plan that had been submitted in January. On the 27th of that month, we held a public hearing, and again, dozens and dozens of people spoke, 100% expressing concerns about the project. At which point the client said, we probably need to meet with the neighborhood, have discussions and work with the neighborhood to address their concerns. And that is exactly what we did. It was a lot of work on the part of the client. I have to thank the neighborhood. Both May 27th and July 21st, we had very good attendance. We had thoughtful dialogue back and forth. And on the 21st, we presented this concept plan to the neighborhood. The plan that we are discussing and showing to you this evening is exactly that same plan with one change, and that is that then attorney Pileggi asked us on behalf of his client, Cindy Lawson, if we would relocate the dog park, which she felt was affecting her as an abutter. And so we have made that modification. So you will see the plan for all of you who were there July 21st, know that the plan we're looking at tonight is exactly the same plan, with the exception that the dog park has been relocated into the area of the playground. So we'd like to present the modifications that we made that addressed the major concerns, and then we will review the plan in a little bit more detail to give you an idea of how we envision this plan coming to fruition. So next slide, Andy, please. So the first concern that we addressed, which was absolutely 100%, probably 2-to-1, the concern that was expressed by everyone is that it was just too big of a project, that 154 campsites did not really fit into the quiet side of MDI. And so, you know, that was really the first thing that the client had to work through, was how do we reduce the project and what is an appropriate reduction? So in the end, we have taken the 154 sites and have reduced them to 55, almost a 2/3 reduction of the scale of the development. Next slide, Andy, please. The second concern expressed, probably the second most concern, I'm sorry, expressed had to do with traffic, especially Route 102, and especially the type of vehicles that were being proposed, RVs on that road. The road was too narrow, the road is not in good shape, and people envisioning RVs on that road caused a lot of concern. So the decision was made that there are going to be no RVs, there are going to be no trailers, there are going to be no truck campers, there are going to be no self-camping sites in this proposal. This proposal will be completely consisting of luxury yurts or glamping tents. Next slide, please. So the next concern really had to do with the overall impact of the environment. And this was expressed in many ways, concerned over the land, over air, over noise, over groundwater, kind of how was the site able to address all this. I will point out that the town hired an engineer to review our initial application, and found that there were some issues with stormwater. We addressed those issues with stormwater. And in fact, the proposal that was submitted in January with 154 sites did meet all the criteria and performance standards of your land use ordinance. So, I mean, it goes to say that we are now 1/3 the size, that the impact is going to be 1/3. And so a lot of those concerns, even though they did meet your ordinance requirements, will definitely be less so. Now we have a reduced scale. There'll be fewer people on the site. Getting rid of RVs means there will be no generators on the site, an issue people had raised. All the sites will have private toilets and showers, or no dump stations, none of the issues that many people discussed. One of the kind of benefits of this COVID pandemic, the fact that we have all had to spend a lot of time together outside in cold weather, has been the development of smokeless fire pits, which are really incredible. Solo is one company that makes them, but they allow for fire pits and for grilling in a smokeless environment. And so those will be used. So there will not be smoke, which was an issue raised by some of the abutters. In terms of stormwater, we will have a pond that is both for fire use. We have worked with the fire chief in Tremont and have developed a pond that will be used for emergency fire, but it's also a water quality pond. We will also have rain gardens throughout the site. And so both water quality and quantity will be addressed before water actually leaves the site. There was concern expressed about everybody coming onto the site and then leaving for lunch and leaving for dinner, and the amount of additional traffic that was going to be generating. And so there will be an all-day cafe that will be providing meals on site, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We also will have a farmhouse store that will be providing prepackaged meals, hopefully prepackaged meals developed locally, since there are a lot of really good purveyors on Mount Desert Island. And Andy, next slide, please. And then the final concern really is to our direct abutters. A lot of the people that were around the north side of the project site felt that they were just too close to a campground. And so we have focused the development onto the south portion of the site. And I know there has been an expression that now we've made that part way too dense. I want to point out that the south portion of the site originally had 77 RV parking areas, as well as supplemental amenities. We are now down to 55. And I would like to speak to those amenities in a minute, but let me just finish by talking about the land to the north, I'm sorry, to the west of the site that we are retaining as open space. There again has been a lot of people saying, so what are you going to do with it? You know, you're just being duplicitous. We are saying that for the next 3 to 5 years, that is going to stay as open space. The plan that we are asking you to approve is calling this retained open space. Nothing will happen there except trails and picnic areas. If in the future, the client would like to develop that, we would like to reserve the option to develop it as residential property. It is not going to be developed as an expansion of the campground. It will be residential property as a development. Furthermore, we are committing to a 100-foot buffer around the boundary of all the property. And I know some people express, well, you're closer than 100 feet on the concept plan. I want to point out it's a concept plan. Next round will definitely have the 100-foot buffer. But the other thing I wanted to point out was, well, let's go to the next slide, Andy, and we can do that at the same time. The next slide shows the concept plan as it was presented to the neighborhood July 21st, except for the moving of the dog park. Farmhouse stays exactly where it was. The entrance to the campground is exactly where it was in the original plan. And that is because that is the location that the Maine Department of Transportation has approved as the safest place to enter the site. So we're not changing that at all. The primary road is actually pretty much the same layout as it was before. We've eliminated, of course, a lot of the roads. It's a much simpler road system at this point. The luxury tents and the yurts will stay in the south portion of the site. And then there are amenities that come with it. There was in Attorney Chow's letter, she felt that a lot of this was in addition to what was before, but I want to point out that on the January plan that was submitted to the planning board, we had sports courts and a bathroom. We had a playground. We had a campground store, a check-in building, an office building, a recreation building, a maintenance building, and there was a building next to the fire pond that was unlabeled that was for picnics. So in fact, all the facilities that are shown on this plan were shown on the original plan. There's no change. There has only been slight modification in that we have now taken the office building, the check-in building, and consolidated that in the farmhouse. We have taken what was originally an indoor pool and moved it into an outdoor pool. And the one facility that we have added is employee housing, which was something that was recommended to our clients as they had conversations earlier this summer, that was something that would really be needed in order for to be able to get employees, which, as everybody knows, all over the state of Maine has really been an issue. So I'd like to go through this plan in a little bit more detail. Andy, if I could have the next slide, please. So the first thing we'll look at are the glamping tents. There are 37 that are shown on the site. We have tried to site them 20 to 30 feet apart. So they really do have a feeling of wilderness. So we are able to maintain the existing forest. There are a couple that are shown closer, and that is because those are kind of family tents where you might have friends or families that want to rent two at the same time and would like to be in closer proximity. If we could have the next slide, please. The glamping tents really are very similar to the ones that are at Terramore already on Mount Desert Island. So I would suggest if any of you have not been into Terramore, please drive in. It's beautiful. They've done a wonderful job there. Their tents might be a little bit closer than ours because this is a wilderness site, but basically it's going to be 1- and 2-bedroom tents, similar in appearance to what is shown here. And the picture on the lower left is a picture of a solo fire pit, for those of you who have not seen one, that shows the smokeless fire pit. Next slide, please. And then the second campground site are yurts. And we are proposing 18 of these split into 2 different clusters. They kind of move along the top of the ridge. And after our neighborhood meeting, some people reached out to us with a little bit of concern that these might be visible from the water, these might be visible from far away. And I want to reassure people that, again, the vegetation is dense enough that we can site these in such a way that we can limb up and have views, but you won't necessarily see the yurts from far away. Dark green tops, they really can blend into the woods, and they kind of will modulate up and down on the land. Andy, next slide, please. The slide on the lower right is a really good visualization of what we're talking about, burying the yurts kind of in among a forest, a lot of topography, there might be outdoor decks. There are no kitchens in these yurts. So if the photograph on the upper right leads people to believe these are dwelling units, I want to reiterate, there are no kitchens in these units whatsoever. There will be an ability to cook on the solo smokeless pits that are in front of the yurts, but both the yurts and the tents will not have kitchens. Next slide, please. Just kind of briefly run through some of the amenities. The facilities that on the original plan were called a recreation building have turned into more of a fitness center and a spa. So really more wellness and less recreation, but it will be, there will be a fitness center and we are showing an outdoor pool, hot tub, and a sauna, outside sauna. If we could have the next slide, please, Andy. Again, to help visualize what is meant by the fitness center, a place where there can be a massage, outdoor pool. We have set it in that location because there's a lot of topography and exposed rock. And so the pool is really envisioned as a pool that is kind of natural, fitting within the existing topography. And the saunas, right now we're looking at the traditional Swedish barrel saunas in the outside. But a very contemplative, very kind of soft space. The next amenity is the Farmhouse Cafe. And as we said, we have taken the check-in, we have taken the business office, and all of this is going into the Farmhouse Cafe, which is an existing building, working within the existing footprint of the house and the barn. Next slide, please. But this will be the first building that you see as you come into the site. The building will be renovated true to the character of a New England farmhouse, using stonework, perennial gardens, and inside working with the character of the existing barn, having a cafe for quick meals. We do envision, as shown on the bottom right, having prepared foods, places where people can come in, grab and go, or food to take back and eat on your site. Also, lower left, you can see a welcome center, but this will be the kind of the hub of the whole facility. This is where there will always be someone available for emergencies, for check-in, for reaching out in this house. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have an area that has picnic, that is a playground, that is the dog park. And as I said, the dog park used to be located up above in that circle that says luxury tents. And at the request of the property owner, we have moved that up to the front of the site. So if we could have the next slide, it'll show kind of the character of how we envision this place. It will have a picnic pavilion, which will be open air, hopefully with a fireplace, but a place for people to gather. Both the playground and the dog park we envision as kind of wilderness installations, again, working with the existing forest, but a place where people can walk the dogs. The actual walking might be like the picture in the lower middle, a place where it is easy to clean up the dogs, And then separated, I don't want you to think the dog park and the playground are on top of each other. We understand the need to separate dogs and children. The children will be in a playground on opposite the parking area in a very different spot. Next slide, please. So that is really a summary of this plan. As I said in the beginning, this is kind of how planning works. We started with a plan that was developed and submitted. And as we said, there were a lot of concerns expressed. We have worked very hard, very honestly, very diligently with the neighbors and the abutters to modify that plan in a way that addresses their concern. That is really good planning, and we are very proud of the plan that has been developed and our clients in their commitment to develop a plan that they feel really does work within their neighborhood. Along with a plan, obviously there is the backup that goes with it. I'm sorry, Greg, I shouldn't call it backup. It's the engineering that goes along with it that makes the plan work properly and addresses a lot of the performance criteria that is outlined in the land use ordinance in the town of Tremont. As Andy said, 25% of the application that is already submitted to you will need some modification. That doesn't really seem like a new application in our minds, but Greg, could you please outline what those modifications are that you see we will be preparing in the next couple weeks?
Yep.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure, I was going to
before
defer to
we
the
go
chair.
on, Ms. Orcott, I'm going to ask the planning board members if they have any questions of you before we move on.
Sure.
Well, it doesn't look like it.
Okay.
In that case, go on, Greg.
Thanks, Mark. I think I'm going to get a moment for, I will want to share my screen briefly. So maybe that means I need to be co-host too, but I want to just kind of comment on the plan itself that the owners have really worked hard in developing with Cynthia, has really made my job easier in a lot of ways. I think that if we take half of the site and we look at how the road circulation is, the patterns we followed weren't driven by need to get places. The topography and running parallel to them was how the roads need to be. And we think about groundwater protection and siltations and those problems are all related to grading. A lot of that's associated with the roads. And I think Cynthia's plan has followed the loop action of the road. It's the same road that you guys have observed on site and said, hey, and this is a reaction to the site visit. Can we guys, besides just, can we fit this clearing of this Woods Road better? And so that part of it. So the circulation remains the same. I think a lot that has to do with the earth. We don't have to grade very large flat areas for RVs and parking. And when we talk about stormwater management, I know from reading the records, Wilson and a lot of the other members of the board really concerned and asking, like, how's the water going to flow and what's happening? And I think the opportunities of these structures in particular allow us a little more flexibility in moving with the earth. And that's the character of what has been part of the planning board process. And I'm excited to show where those small, where those modifications can answer a lot of the same questions we had before, but in a much more, I'd say, simplified fashion. So I think a lot of it has to do with circulation and the placement. In general, we had the loop road in the center, we had all these RVs, and now we have forests and buildings that can be up on posts and chase the topography, which make, again, my job a bit easier. So Jesse, I don't know if you've been able to share the screen.
Yeah, you should be able to now.
All right, let me try it. So what I'm going to just do briefly is let's try that. The board, we went through a pretty lengthy checklist, and I won't belabor, but we look at what was used at the completeness hearing. Copy of the application. We go through The entire first page is all the same. We get to buffer. Sure, we need to re-explain the buffer, but you have a plan that says they're at 100 feet. There's a lot of it that is not changed. You guys have a monumental amount of information, and the checklist condenses really, if you remember, we had 2 completeness hearings, and in between that, a peer review. So as we continue on, we get deed, seals of professionals, financial capacities, existing conditions. All these things are same in the binders. These things exist. But we're looking forward to showing you how this improved plan can work better. So we have the location and dimensions of existing buildings on the sites. We recall that the board asked us to express the heights and that, and so we want to be able to make sure we modify and reflect the buildings on the site with you. This is the second page of your completeness application. We've got one thing we need to change. Existing driveways, existing roads, Clark Road, all these things in our application. We get to indication of water supply sufficient and quantified, excuse me. Sure, we have to explain how this is modified. We need to give you calculations on what a new drawer may have compared to the capacity of the land. Same thing with water supply, but all this is reduced. Sewage, we had 18,000 gallons of available septic. So we need to provide we've got 4 out of 27 of the submission exhibits that we'll have to modify. And I remember specific conversations with member Wilson about directions and flows and surface of waters and where we had these arrows on the plan. And I'd be happy to show, we don't have to deal with arrows and flows and ditching all the way on the north side. So there's a reduced stormwater management, that we had thoroughly reviewed and peer reviewed that in the end said, sure, meet your standards. So I'm looking forward to providing that to you. Landscaping buffering plan, we've already gone over that as a direct result of, I think, what is considered a planning process. It's how it's meant to evolve. So we have 5 location of exterior lighting, lessened, utilities, sure, all lessened. So we get through peak traffic, all these things are reduced and modified. And out of all the 39 exhibits, we have 25% of them require an update. And that's not a bad thing, right? We've talked about lessening impacts. We've listened to the neighbors, and I think there's some details in here that we're looking forward to sharing with you and having those engaging conversations. But it's clearly not by any information you have in the binders, nor by your own checklist used to vote for completeness, is it even remotely close to a new application. In fact, it's a modified one on half the site. Circulation remains the same. The housing and where the spaces that people will use has been condensed in the center of the forest and removed from the sort of the perimeter of the property. I submit that we look forward to altering those minor parts of the application, which are only 25%. I'll pass the meeting back to the chair, Mark, for comments and continuation of the public hearing.
Okay, you're done with your presentation, Greg?
I am for the moment, Mark.
Okay, board members, any questions of Greg? Okay.
May I sum up and just
I was
complete?
just going to ask if somebody else from your team wants to add anything. So go ahead, Andy.
So I think as Attorney O'Connell's memo points out, whether something is a new application or a modification of an existing plan is a matter of common sense. And I think your ordinance actually gives some pretty good common sense indicators. This is not a campground before going to a different use, campground before, campground after. We're not proposing kitchen units for any of the yurts, the tents, or the employee housing area. We're just a campground without RVs and without cabins, and instead yurts and tents. And we've reduced from 154 down to 55. I think as the courts examine this, it's the polar opposite of Brown versus Town of Kennebunkport that was cited by Attorney Chow in her letter. And I would just like to point out that when you propose a phase one in a subdivision, as that applicant did in 1985, 2 years go off the clock, there's a change in sketch plan, subdivision sketch plan review requirements. And in 1987, that applicant says, well, we were pending as to both phase one and another 47 acres in phase two. The law court said, no. You were not pending as to phase two because you've increased the land base, different project, different phase. Here we are the same owner, the same entire parcel of land, except we've proposed to retain for 3 to 5 years and only use it as open space during that time frame. Your ordinance is clear, change of use requires planning board review. So not only are we willing to place conditions on the retained land that would satisfy the board as part of its review, your ordinance says it's change of use that requires an original review by the planning board. We have not changed the use because we had campground before, we have campground after. And I think what you see is a better campground and a campground that's responsive to the concerns that neighbors had. Are we going to be able to satisfy everyone? Clearly not. But we've engaged with a very careful review. And we're actually interested in having any questions that the planning board has, because I remember Jeff said, when do we get to be the planning and planning board? Well, this is a perfect example of land planning that has reduced the scale and scope of the project in response to concerns under the review standards. And because we started into a substantive review with a campground, we find it incongruous and slightly absurd to say that this is a new application. A new application is when you have a different use, a different land base. And so I think common sense suggests that we should be able to continue our review with the planning board, give Mr. Johnston the chance to use a few days to get 25% of the submittals changed and before you, and that we take up a substantive review with a public hearing as of the 28th of September. And we're happy to submit by the 14th in order to be on your agenda for the 28th. And we thank you for the opportunity to get this information before you.
Thank you, Andy. Before we move on to Ms. Chow, board members, any questions of the applicant? Yes, Lawson.
I'm just wondering if somebody could clarify a little bit more about the employee housing. I think that's a new addition to this, as part of the revision. And I've heard somebody refer to employee housing and then somebody else talk about how it doesn't have kitchens. And I'm just sort of confused how you think about housing that doesn't have kitchens in it and how that, what that looks like.
Sure, Les, and I can respond to that. We envision this employee housing somewhat like the cabins that were in the original proposal. They do not have kitchens. There is going to be a cafe on site that is offering 3 meals a day, and the employees will be eating in that cafe. That will be part of being an employee.
How many employees do you expect to be housed there?
I think we were discussing 8 to 12. Does that sound right, Kenya?
Out of 4 cabins, is that what I saw on the plan? Or
that's correct.
Yeah. Any other questions? Board members, Jeff?
Yes, can you hear me? I unmuted. We went through our checklist and found the original application complete. And then we went to public hearings and so forth. I don't want to be in a public hearing to see the checklist, revisions to all the checklist. I think we need to look at that before we go to the next step. And have time to review. 25% of them plus are being changed. I think we need a separate, the next meeting should be reviewing a revised checklist to be sure we still feel it's complete.
We have the same notion in mind.
I'm
Mr.
asking Mark
Mr.
at the moment,
I assumed that was going to be the case, Jeff,
what was going to be the case
that we'd be reviewing the entire checklist.
at a public hearing or just before it on the?
No, yeah, well,
When do we review that before our next public hearing?
yes, we would have to. We have to find that complete.
Yeah, I mean, that's laid out in Attorney O'Connell's letter, Jeff, on the second page, second paragraph, where she talks about the fact that it will likely require another completeness review.
Right. What all I'm asking is where we, on the filing requirements that Andy's volunteered to comply with, does it work in our schedule for another meeting to do the checklist review again?
Can I just make an offer?
Yeah. We have to review the checklist for completeness or the new, well, we haven't made a decision on that. The plan, we have to review it for completeness and then schedule, if we find it complete, schedule a public hearing, just like we did from the first time or for the first time.
Can I just
Right,
make
Jesse?
an offer?
Jesse,
Yes.
isn't that correct?
Yeah, I think what Andy Hamilton was suggesting was that you did both of those the same night, I believe, is what he was suggesting.
Yeah, let me
That's
be
what I'm having a problem with.
Yeah, let me just be pragmatic about Jeff's concern, because I think I can address it. It's possible I can't, but I think the difference between the case law, as Attorney O'Connell points out, is both in the Lyman and the Cardinale case, the law court said, you don't even have to have completeness in order to start a substantive review. As a practical matter, we're relatively relaxed because you've already started a substantive review. And unless there's something that disrupts that substantive review, I think the cadence that the planning board is used to is you do the checklist. And I view this as a confirmatory completeness checklist. And I don't think it's going to take that long. But I do think that should come first on the 28th of September. But I would just ask the planning board through its chairman and its members, could you consider starting the checklist, starting the meeting on the 28th with a checklist? And if you determine that the confirming checklist requirements are met, then you'd have the option of starting into a public hearing. One thing that's clear is that we are under the gun. And if what happens is we can't have a stepwise, efficient, orderly review of largely the same application, then we're going to get stranded before we get caught up in a separate discussion that Attorney Chow and I agreed to keep separate from this land use review. So I was just simply proposing, because as Greg said, 25% of the submittals need to be modified. The other 75% stay common to what you've already reviewed. Go through a checklist similar to what Greg did tonight and check and cross-check Greg's understanding first, and then second, go to the public hearing. But notice it so that you could move to a public hearing on the 28th, because we're a bit jammed up in terms of schedule for obvious reasons.
We have one more meeting before that, the 14th. Could you get the modifications to us before the 14th meeting?
We could, but it would be really close to the 14th. And so I would ask Greg to think about that with us. If, as you say, Greg, only 25% of the exhibits need to be changed, if we can, noting Attorney O'Connell's point that the planning board can establish whatever rules of procedure are appropriate, have some leniency in not having to submit 14 days in advance, but 7 days in advance. Is that a possibility? I just ask you as a possibility.
Let's say that the 14th submittal puts us 3 weeks away. So I think that time is really necessary to give the board the level of care that this project has come to expect. from the beginning. I don't want to shortchange what I think is a deliberate effort to be very clear and concise. We'll defer to the board, but I don't prefer to jam us up further, which would force us into a position that we haven't been complete on the 28th. That's my honest opinion.
My concern is what happens if we find the application is not complete, and that we've gone to the expense and trouble of scheduling a public hearing
That's
that
mine.
we can't do.
I agree.
Let me ask the question this way. Is there much expense associated with posting a notice of a public hearing such that if you, as you suggest, Mr. Chairman, the application is found to be incomplete, you simply don't continue to the public hearing. But if it's found complete, you could proceed to a public hearing.
I
That's all.
understand that, but there are advertising costs and staff costs involved.
Haven't we been paying those advertising fees?
Yeah.
Jesse,
Who has? Jesse?
we have been.
The
Okay,
applicants have to.
okay.
But the other issue is, we schedule a public hearing for the 28th and we get the public there, and then we find we're not even ready for the public hearing. I don't think it's fair to the public. I think before you schedule a public hearing, you should be complete and ready to go forward so they know what the issues are. They need time just as everyone else does to look at this thing, and they don't know until we say, oh yeah, everything's fine. Well, it's not fine. I don't think it's fair to the public.
If
Ms. O'Connell?
So I'm going to disagree. I think if Jeff can get the materials in, I think he said 7 days before that hearing. I guess my thinking's a little different than perhaps some of the other members of the board. I approach this from the perspective of it's partly our job to work with applicants and try to look for ways to work with them and not to sort of trip people up and look for every little way to sort of say no or deny things. And so I think that, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think that, 7 days based on what they described, which is a relatively small percentage of changes, is plenty of time for people to get up. We know what it is. We know what it is. So I think if Jeff can do that, if Andy and those guys can do that, I'd be for that. And look, we've done that before. If the public hearing can't go forward for whatever reason, we just don't have it.
Jesse, isn't there something in the ordinance that after an application is found complete, a public hearing is scheduled so many days afterwards? I think it's 21 days.
You just have to notice in the newspaper 21 days before the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I've checked and cross-checked this procedure. It works under your ordinance. I think you're correct that the only judgment call is whether the public, which has been very attentive to all the neighborhood meetings and each of the planning board meetings, if they were asked, to balance with the applicant's needs in terms of efficient schedule, if they are asked to attend a meeting that they might not get to speak at because there's a determination by the planning board that the application is incomplete, they'll have a chance, because there's no way that transparency will be sacrificed for this project. I'm certain of that. So we'd like the chance to go on the 28th of September and have it scheduled for both a completeness check-in and then a restart of the substantive review. And we don't think that's unreasonable in light of we're under the gun.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, hold on, Ms. Chow. Ms. O'Connell, can you advise us or give an opinion on what we've been discussing here?
Mr. Chair, just before Ms. O'Connell goes.
Okay, go ahead.
I've been quiet, but before Ms. O'Connell opines, I would like an opportunity to respond to this procedural issue. I've been.
Okay, go ahead.
That. Thank you very much. I actually think your ordinance does, I agree that it is not fair to schedule a completeness determination and a public hearing on the same date for the reasons that I think one of your planning board members already mentioned. Not only would it impose significant costs on neighbors who are wanting to respond to the issues, and if you haven't found this to be complete and it goes through more iterations of a completeness determination, it doesn't make sense for any peer review or engineering rebuttal to be done until the planning board has a complete application. Your ordinance actually recognizes that. In Article 7B4, it says that as soon as the application is found to be complete, the planning board may schedule a public hearing. You are not to schedule that public hearing until a completeness determination is met. And if there's a 21-day advertisement requirement in your ordinance, which is also in section 7B of your ordinance, I think you have to follow your ordinance. And that is only fair, I think, to my clients as well as other members of the public who wish to comment on the complete application.
Thank you. Something that Ms. Chow said made me think. One of the things, Greg, is you're going to do new stormwater calculations, correct?
Well, when you look at stormwater market, half the challenge is existing conditions. We understand existing conditions perfectly, and that half of the project is less than half of what was proposed as far as like what changes happen there. So there are adjustments to the stormwater, but we're comfortable in having half of that complete because it's it's existing conditions versus proposed, and the proposed is so much less that we're comfortable with that.
What if we wanted to have an independent expert look at those like we did originally, because they're going to be different?
I would say you reserve that right. I feel in full confidence that where we ended up in the last review, where we'll end up this time.
Yep, that may be true, but we do reserve that right, and as a result, it makes it difficult to schedule a public hearing at the same time we find something complete, in my mind. Ms. O'Connell, did you want to say anything here?
Yeah, I just want to point out that under the ordinance, once a completeness review is undertaken and the board find that an application is complete, the ordinance requires a hearing within 30 days. It doesn't really specify when you have to notice that. The other section that Attorney Chow pointed to, it just says that once you find it complete, you may schedule a public hearing, which does actually seem a little inconsistent with the one before that, but it doesn't require, it doesn't, just by the language, it doesn't require that you have to wait until the end of the completeness review to schedule the hearing. I do think there's a problem of holding them both on the same days, but I don't think there's anything in the ordinance that would prevent you from scheduling a public hearing for a week or two after the completeness review. And then if it doesn't pass completeness, that hearing could just be cancelled.
Or continue to a date certain. I view this as very similar to what Attorney O'Connell, Attorney Chow, and I do every day in our practice when we're before a court. You have to get ready by the court date, and so you get your experts ready. And if we're giving notice in fairness to Attorney Chow and her experts, be ready on the 28th. If you're not needed, you've already prepared. You just reserve until the next date when the court's available. This happens all the time. And I think it's only delay that's being thought of here. And so I would respond by asking the planning board, as has been suggested, find ways to work with us because we're under the gun. Look at the October schedule and you'll see there's only 2 meeting dates, the 12th and the 26th, before the 2nd of November. So I submit we need to have a chance as applicant to get through the review process if it is possible. Otherwise, it's becoming patently clear that there are efforts to stall us out until after November 2. And it's just clear.
So Andy, what you're saying, you're under the gun because of the possibility of a moratorium being enacted?
Obviously, you were at the meeting last night, Mark, and you had a question put to you and you answered it. So you know what you just said, right?
Mr. Chairman, this is Amy Chow. I thought we were not going to discuss the merits of the moratorium or how it operates. but I would suggest that that has nothing to do with your normal operations and opportunity to provide the public with what is the normal course of due process in responding to a complete application. It's very unusual to schedule a public hearing on the same date as a completeness determination. And the plain language of your ordinance suggests that you can't even schedule it until you've made that determination. So how would you make a completeness determination at a meeting and then also say, now we schedule it for 5 minutes from now? I don't believe that's what your ordinance requires. And it's not fair to the public to make them do that on the same night.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Not
Thank
fair
you.
to, not fair to the public. I need to be heard, Mr. Chairman, because fairness and equity suggests that we have the opportunity in a collaborative way to work with this planning board. We've done it before, we'll do it again. So we're simply asking that we take note of the fact that Ms. Chow presented with her July 30th letter a mechanism that was acted on last night by the select board that creates a time frame. If the planning board wants to work with us, we want to work with you, and it'll become patently obvious. I see the notion that if you do completeness review in one night and then start the substantive review for a project that's never been reviewed before, that's tight. This project, as Mr. Johnston has pointed out, has been reviewed. All the existing conditions, 75% of the exhibits are common between the prior application and this one. And Ms. Chow is only seeking to interpose delay in the review of this project. So I don't think that's the standard. The standard is, what does the ordinance say? And I think the board's attorney has been clear, as I found when I reviewed the ordinance, it's permissive. You may or you may not. The options are yours, but this planning board on this record is going to make clear whether they want to give us a fair opportunity to have a completed review in a timely fashion. And I've seen this board work very well with applicants. We just ask for that understanding and that opportunity.
And I would just like to be heard briefly on an ordinance interpretation issue, because Mr. Hamilton is saying that your ordinance permits this. Article 7, Section B3 of your site plan ordinance says that as soon as the board determines the application to be complete, the board shall notify the applicant in writing of this finding, meet the notification requirements of subsection B4 below, and place the item on the agenda for substantive review within 30 days of this finding or at the next scheduled planning board meeting, whichever is later. So I would submit actually that this requires you to have a hearing no sooner, because a hearing is the only place that you can conduct a substantive review of this new plan. You cannot do that until soonest the next scheduled planning board meeting, after the meeting where you're holding the completeness determination. I am not making these arguments, Mr. Chairman, to interpose delay. I am simply asking you to fairly and consistently implement the plain language of your ordinance and the review procedures that you are required to follow under this ordinance.
So
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to offer this. I think it's now become clear why Attorney Chow had objections to exactly what the planning board did. It noticed this meeting tonight as a public hearing. She wants to create discontinuity in the public hearing. It has been a longstanding practice of Maine planning boards, once a public hearing is held, to at that same hearing, continue it to a date certain. There's nothing irregular about the notion of taking this meeting tonight that is noticed as a public hearing. Attorney Chow and all of her clients that had noticed that there was going to be a public hearing tonight know that they have the opportunity to be heard. She, in fact, has been heard many times. So the chair could, with the consent of the planning board, continue this public hearing to the 28th of September and meet the public hearing requirement. In addition, there could be, as Mr. Dunbar said, a 21-day notice posted for a meeting on the 28th of September. I have seen many meetings, frankly, of planning boards, whether it's for subdivision review or site plan reviews, hold a completeness meeting and then immediately go into a public hearing on the substantive review. What's going to happen if you consent to Attorney Chow's approach, which is you have to do this in a rigid stepwise approach, is you're either going to have to schedule a special meeting or you're going to have to hold the final substantive review very close to the 26th of October, so that we only have one opportunity to satisfy you as to any concerns. She would just assume, put us in the box, the Hobson's choice of you either take a denial or you have no chance to address the concerns of the planning board in order to get to a concluded review. So it's become obvious to me now what the strategy is. We didn't want to have a public hearing tonight, so there'd be no opportunity for the planning board to simply continue the public hearing to the 28th of September. And I think you can do that. It's done all the time by Maine planning boards. And again, as Attorney O'Connell cited on page 3 of her letter, the planning board has the right under a case called Jackson versus Town of Kennebunk to adopt their own rules of procedure. You can interpret and adopt a rule of procedure that says for this proceeding, because you've already been through the substance of this application, we're going to continue the public hearing to the 28th of September. We're going to do completeness. And if we find it complete, we'll continue into a substantive review at a public hearing. If we don't find it complete, we'll have to schedule another public hearing, and it may have to be a special meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Hold on a second. I don't think this board's necessarily opposed to holding a special meeting to address those issues, but other board members, you want to weigh in here? Anybody have anything to say?
Mark, I've had my
I think earlier it was suggested that they would get us the revised plan, look at my calendar, on by September 14th for completeness review then. Did I hear that right earlier? No?
Correct. That's correct.
That's what I thought I heard. So is that possible, or where do we leave that? Is that step possible? Let's put the hearing aside for a minute.
Right. Is it possible to get the plan in by the 14th is what you're asking?
You mean to have the meeting on the 14th?
To have the completeness review on the 14th.
not only my work, but some of the experts' works, I think may force that window. And I've said that right up front from the beginning. And now that I've had a chance to speak, I also want to take notice that
I would just want to, you're saying no. You're saying,
I'm saying that's not our preference, because I don't think that puts our best foot forward considering the gun we are under.
but Greg, you're under that gun or you're under another gun, right? I mean, pick your poison.
But we also want to make sure you've said we're submitting the 14th. We've agreed to this 2 weeks in advance to for submitting, and then abutters can submit comments 7 days in ahead. So the idea that no one's going to have a chance to react and see the plans and have the program before the 28th isn't true, because we're in 2 weeks in advance.
But I think if I could, Greg, I think board member Witham may be suggesting that if we got filed by the 14th and the board establishing its own rules of procedures were to have a special meeting on the 21st, that would give the opportunity for you to submit 7 days in advance, to give Ms. Chow's technical team that's already on notice that there could be a hearing coming up in September. They would have the opportunity to respond within the 7 days and to be able to present comments at a meeting on the 21st. So I think it becomes a question of, could we have, instead of 2 weeks, which was one rule that was adopted in this case, if we had it 7 days in advance, submitted to both Attorney Chow and to the town so that it could be circulated promptly to the planning board as of the 14th, could we have a meeting on the 21st?
I understood the
Please.
questions and the cadence.
Who was speaking there? I know Ms. Chow wants to speak. Did somebody say something? Okay, Ms. Chow, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would respectfully ask, since we do have Attorney O'Connell here assisting the board, I would like to ask her interpretation of Article 7B3, which does, I think notwithstanding Andy's statement that the board can adopt its own procedures, and while I agree that that can be the case, it cannot do so in conflict with the procedures that are outlined in your ordinance. You must first follow those procedures and perhaps fill in the gaps where those procedures are silent, or where it's silent about procedures. But this seems very clear to me, and I would like to hear from the attorney who is assisting you to see if she agrees or not.
Actually,
O'Connell?
sure, I have a different interpretation on that particular section. I don't believe that it's saying you have to wait that certain period of time before you can have the review. That time is setting the outer limit of when you have to have the review by. So it's saying you have to have it within 30 days, or the next scheduled hearing, whichever is later. That's pushing the, like, when you have to have it by. It's not saying you have to wait that period before you have it. So it's actually kind of the reverse, I think, of what how Attorney Chow is looking at that.
I think, to come back to the question that was posed by one of the board members, when can we submit by? Our team gives a consensus answer that we can submit by the 14th of September. We're then suggesting you could have a special meeting if you want to push the schedule for both the planning board and the public and the applicant for the 21st for completeness, and then have substantive review on the 28th. Alternatively, we were suggesting, why couldn't you, if we think you're going to have a shortened checklist where we've already been found complete, all you have to do is reconfirm completeness based upon 25% of the exhibits being modified, then meet on the same evening, because I think within 30 days means within 30 days. It means you can do it for the same day. That's within 30 days. So I think either two options, for the applicant's proposing to the board in a collaborative fashion. We could either have our exhibits in by the 14th in either scenario. One scenario is we have a special meeting on the 21st. Give the board plus the technical team for the interested persons 7 days. They bring their comments to the meeting on the 21st as to completeness only, and then have a substantive review on the 28th of September. Alternatively, I don't see a problem. I've seen it done by many boards. Most boards do it this way. Part one in the evening is finishing completeness, particularly since we've already been found complete once before. And then part two of the same evening is a substantive review. So whichever the board prefers. I think Attorney O'Connell said clearly in her letter, it's the board's final choice. The applicant's just trying to work with the planning board to see if we can work up a schedule for September.
Board members, any comments on that?
If we start heading in that route, I mean, my preference would be to have a special meeting on the 21st. I kind of, just after thinking about it and listening to Jeff, we know it's going to be a long hearing. And, you know, there might be some questions and back and forth on completeness. And that just gives us, if I had to vote, I would have a special meeting on the 21st and space that out a little bit. That would be what I would, as my thing, space out the hearing and the completeness review.
So you're saying submit by the 14th, special meeting on the 21st, and then the 28th for a completeness review?
Public hearing.
I think that's what
Or a public hearing. Completeness review, completeness review on the 21st, public hearing on the 28th. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's where I'm at. I don't know what people think.
Jeff Lawson? Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because part of me is trying to like like it feels like you know like we have regularly scheduled meetings and there's a process that we go through and we should do that, which would mean like we should have the completeness review on the 28th, and then we would schedule the public hearing for whenever the next, you know, whatever makes sense in October. And I'm trying to sort of hold like two truths at once, which is that like I'm trying to ignore the possible moratorium because one, I don't actually know it. I never signed it. I wasn't at the meeting last night. I don't know the details behind it. I don't feel like I need to, but also that is real. And like, we do want to sort of work with the applicant. And that, I think that's one of the sort of Brett's points, which is that like, we do want to be able to collaborate and be nimble if it doesn't sacrifice the sort of due process. I guess, which is to say that the idea of trying to like squeeze it all into one day feels to me too tight, and that I think that the use of the 25%, because it's only 10 out of the 29 or whatever it was, 10 out of the 39 points, it's actually like, it feels to me like it's more than 25% because we're actually talking about like the stuff that is proposed. All the existing things stay the same, but that that's sort of less important anyway. So so I don't want to diminish the importance of the completeness review, and that we should actually take our time and look through the application and make sure that it's complete before the public hearing. I'm not sure that we need to make sure it's complete before we schedule the public hearing. And so, but I think that giving some time between completeness and public hearing, and maybe 1 week is enough, seems prudent.
We have scheduled special meetings in the past. What we haven't done, at least since I've been on the board, is have a public hearing right after, in the same meeting, right after finding an application complete. Jeff? Anything? Unmute yourself, Jeff.
I go back to my original position. I'm not in favor at all of having them both on the same night. And I believe Brett has raised one of the approaches to take it, having a special meeting on the 21st. I lean more towards where Lawson is in his positions, is to go through in a normal schedule, how we normally handle an application.
Was that what you meant, Lawson?
Yeah, and I don't know, I find myself a little tongue-tied because it seems like if we schedule, you know, our next meeting is what, the October 12th. If we scheduled a meeting for the public hearing and substantive review for October 12th, that seems okay, but I don't actually, but maybe there's like something about the moratorium that there's probably a lot about the moratorium that I don't understand. And so like, that's fine. That's for somebody else to figure out. But maybe that's why this is a much bigger issue than I'm recognizing. And so, but we've already established that we're not, like, that's not part of our consideration tonight. And so if it's not part of our consideration tonight, then we should, you know.
Okay. We've got a bit off track here. It's not exactly the way I expected this to go. Why don't we discuss this a little bit later? We had the applicant give a little bit of a presentation, and I know Ms. Chow wanted to respond to that, and maybe she can do that right now. Is that okay with everybody on the board? And then we'll come back to this later because we're going to need to make some decisions after all this is done. I don't hear any complaints, so go ahead, Ms. Chow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the planning board. I will try to keep this fairly brief. I know that you have my letter of August 17th outlining various arguments and outlining a number of things. I wanted to focus on a few things. One of the reasons we would like you to vote that to treat this new concept plan as a new application for purposes of site plan review and for purposes of the statute that governs what is a pending proceeding, is that to do so would mean that the applicant would have to comply with the May 5th amendments to your land use ordinance that govern campgrounds. And the May 5th campground regulations, those amendments, were simply passed to bring campgrounds into alignment with all the other requirements that every other business use in town is required to adhere to, including visual buffering, including a number of things, setbacks that were specific to campgrounds. There were some specific performance standards. And so when the applicant says, we've gone to great lengths to reduce this and to address the concerns of the neighbors, if they are addressing the concerns and so focused on responding to the concerns of the neighbors, why is it that they are trying to avoid the very campground regulations that were adopted as part of the land use ordinance amendments on May 5th that were designed to protect those very neighbors? They're designed, those buffers, those setbacks, the visual buffers, the lighting issues, all of those standards on May 5th, which I would submit are just a beginning and not the ending of what should be regulating commercial development uses in town when they are integrated into what is intended to be a primarily residential neighborhood. Those are standards that the town voters felt that it was important to impose. And so calling this a new application for what it is, which is really a wholesale replacement of one concept and plan for another, recognizes that that acknowledges that the May 5th amendments should apply to this application. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on how this plan differs from the other. I think you've seen our letter and you can compare the site plan from the original plan and with the concept plan. I will just simply note that a lot of this is news to us tonight in terms of how we are, and that's why I'm glad that this planning board is treating this as only an informational meeting and not a substantive review, because it couldn't be a continuation of a substantive review of a plan that is no longer before you. So what I would like to say is the employee housing as an example. The applicant is saying that there will be no kitchen facilities, there will be no cooking facilities, either in the yurts or the employee housing. And yet we see a photograph of the yurts that show cooking facilities. And I don't need to get into an argument of what constitutes cooking facilities right here, but I do believe that these yurts and the employee housing, if they are arranged like the photographs show, with a kitchen counter, with a sink, with a full-size refrigerator and a microwave, I would submit to you that that's a cooking facility. And many town ordinances have recognized that as such. And so not only is this a campground application now, but we would submit that with the addition of employee housing and these yurts that are much more like permanent structures or semi-permanent structures, that have their own toilet facilities, their own showering facilities, individualized, that they certainly would meet the residential dwelling unit definition and require much more robust additional review under subdivision than just merely a campground application. But what I would like to focus on tonight, I have just a few exhibits that hopefully, Jesse, I hope you can help me with these, because I want to address the specific point about the retained open land and why the planning board, I don't believe, can determined that this is simply a reduction in the intensity of use that is being proposed here, and certainly a modification. Because what they've done, notwithstanding what Ms. Orchid has said about what they plan to do with this retained land, what's evident, what is very evident is that they have made no commitments to restrict their use of the retained land. They've only made a 3 to 5 year commitment or statement to the board that they'll leave it as open space for that duration of time.
Wait,
And-
Mr. Chairman, I have a procedural question that I need
Wait a
to
minute.
pose to Ms. Chow.
I
before
think
she
I-
proceeds.
I think I was very respectful.
Andy, I believe
of
Ms.
Mr.
Chow is
Hamilton.
speaking. We'll let you respond to her after she's done. Thank you.
I just hope we present
No,
fact
no,
and not
Wait.
fiction.
Andy, please.
let's be courteous to the other speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll continue. So what I would like to focus on is that I don't believe the planning board is in a position tonight to make a determination that this is merely a mere modification or reduction in intensity of an original application. Because the applicant hasn't been clear about how it's now going to use half of the parcel they were intending to develop in their original application, which would suggest that this is a very different application. It's certainly a very different plan. And I think that the important context is, Jesse, would you mind putting up the concept plan? I don't need to put up, well, can we do the original plan just very briefly? I don't mean to belabor this because I know you've all seen this, but just for visual focus. Okay, this is the original plan presented in January of this year and modified in March of this year. And you can see that it occupies the full 43 acres of the site. The northern part of the parcel is on the right of the screen. And the southern part is obviously on the left, with Route 102 going up and down, west to east. So now can we go to the concept plan, Jesse? Thank you for your patience.
Better Jesse than me.
Or me. Okay, so this is the concept plan that was presented on August 10th by the applicant. And I don't need to belabor the point, but all of the features that have been discussed, the amenities, the permanent structures, the spa, the outdoor pool, all of those now are occupied and intensified on half of the parcel. And what you see at the bottom of the screen that I think is important to note is that the parcel that you see in yellow is a 1.6 acre parcel that Acadia Wilderness Lodge went before the planning board and got approval for an 11 unit, 11 cabin campground in 2019. And the reason I mention that here, and you can see Kellytown Road, I've drawn very poorly Kellytown Road in blue, down below at the bottom of the screen where concept plan is. So you can see where 102 and Kellytown Road would intersect. These are the two roads that would provide connectivity between these two sites, these two parcels. And I think it's very important for the planning board to see the connection. The reason that's important is for the first time, this concept plan shows a road from the new glamp ground to the first glamp ground, and I call that a glamp ground because although the site plan for the 2019 approved campground what called for 11 cabins, it's my understanding that what is actually being built on the ground are yurts that exceed the square footage of the units, the cabin units that were supposed to be built there. And I would simply ask the question, why would there need to be a road going between these two sites that obviously would connect the current proposal to Kellytown Road and also the first proposed campground proposal that's been approved to Route 102. So can we please go to the next slide, Jesse?
I guess we need to prearrange as applicant to have Jesse do our slides next time.
I'm glad there's someone who has technical competency here, and it's not me. I won't belabor this. This is the site plan for the 2019 approved campground, the 11 cabin campground that Acadia Wilderness Lodge got approval for. That's that little yellow parcel that is connected to the current concept plan. So in terms of, okay, and then can we now go to the final slide? Sorry for the delay, folks. I'm almost finished. And if we can shrink that down so we can see the entirety of that slide, Jesse, or what, I don't know if we can make it smaller. Okay, whoop. Can we bring that down a teeny bit? All right, so the point I would like to make here to the planning board is that the original plan for the 43-acre parcel had development of the entire 43-acre parcel. And what is now happening is that the proposal is now on the pink part of the parcel. And I would submit to you that when you look at these things together, that there is a way to look at this campground proposal as really an integrated commercial development. And phase 1 was what was approved in 2019. Phase 2 is what the new concept plan proposes to develop as a glamp ground, that is a 55-unit glamp ground. And phase 3 in green, although the statements have been made to the planning board that, oh, it will not be an extension of the campground and it will potentially be a residential development, no promises and no restrictions have been made. And so this further underscores that what we have here is a phased project. And I don't know how the planning board can conclude decisively that the impacts on the land with these two parcels are less than and are just a reduction in intensification of use when they've made no restrictions on the use of the green part of the parcel. Although they say it's not going to be an extension of a campground, there are no restrictions made. They should be required to leave it as open space or conservation area. If they were not to do that, and if they were to develop it residentially, those have impacts on the land too. And in fact, the residential development, unless they're going to buy land from somebody else, has to be accessed from Route 102 or from Kellytown Road. And if it's from Route 102, it's going to be through the new glamp ground project that is proposed in pink, which is really phase 2 of what I think is an integrated commercial campground resort, whatever you want to call it, residential subdivision development. Whatever this thing is in pink, it's not anything like what was originally proposed in January, which was why I believe that the planning board cannot conclude that this is a mere modification and a reduction in intensity of use when no promises have been made not to develop the green portion. So for all the reasons in my letter that I don't need to belabor, I believe that the planning board should either conclude that this should be a new application, or at least is not in a position tonight to conclude that the May 5th amendments don't apply to what is being proposed here. And maybe you need to, I would submit, maybe you need to wait until the completeness determination is done before making a determination about about whether those May 5th campground amendments should apply to this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, any questions for Ms. Chow? Ms. Chow, you were talking about the reserve land. I thought I heard Mr. Hamilton say that they're willing to place conditions on the reserve land. I understand that no conditions have been made as of now, but they're willing to do that.
Well, I would submit,
That's correct. That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
again, I would submit that if that's the case, then all the more reason why this board tonight cannot make a determination about whether the May 5th amendments should apply, because in a completeness determination, that's where those conditions need to be made. And I would
Okay.
submit that if they're leaving completely open the possibility of further development of what I call the green portion of the 43-acre parcel, then, and not be willing to subject themselves to conditions, then I don't think that the planning board can make that decision tonight.
So principles of fairness would suggest that we have the opportunity to respond to what Attorney Chow has created as a new work of art.
Yes, yes, Andy, you'll have that opportunity in a minute. I believe Brett has a question.
Yeah, I just had a question for Attorney Chow. Earlier we discussed, process, and I don't think anyone disagrees that, if we move forward with this concept as a continuation of the current application, we will undergo another completeness review. So if we were to deem this to be a new application, other than requiring the applicant to pay, another application fee, what else what would be the purpose?
Oh, I can answer that.
Perks?
The purpose is,
Oh,
so
perfect.
you have the original campground application that is a vastly different project, which was proposed in January. A completeness determination was made in the March, April timeframe, and a first public hearing held on April 27th. Then you had the May 5th amendments to the land use ordinance, which were intended to capture campgrounds and treat them just like any other business use is treated in town. And what I would submit is that when you submit a new campground application, which we believe to be more than a campground, but it certainly does include a campground, more than 3 months after the May 5th amendments have passed, why shouldn't those new amendments apply to this application? And so the impact of this is that calling this a new application is recognizing it for what it is. And I also I don't mean to make legal arguments, but the Brown case, which Mr. Hamilton cited, does not stand for the proposition that if it's the same use, it must be the same application. In fact, it stands for the opposite. It was that situation where a residential subdivision was being proposed in phases. We had the same developer, the same parcel at issue, and the same use. And in that case, what the law court found important was that they hadn't undertaken any substantive review of the phase 2 part of the project. That's why that wasn't deemed pending. The same applies here. You haven't taken up substantive review of this new concept plan, and so it shouldn't be deemed to be pending so as to avoid application of what the voters felt were important on May 5th to impose for new campgrounds in the town of Treen.
Right. So I think what you're saying there is it really has let's assume those May 5th amendments didn't exist for a second. Let's just assume that didn't happen. And we had an applicant before us that modified the plan like they have here today. And someone said to us, you need to treat that as a new application. Let's assume, that there weren't these modifications and amendments back in May. What would be the reason for the board in terms of its process, other than to charge them a new application fee? What would be the reason for us to do that?
Well, I don't know if your ordinance allows you to waive application fees, so I wouldn't suggest that would be the reason to do that. And I would also acknowledge that there could be de minimis modifications that of course would not require a brand new application fee. And that would be unreasonable. I would agree with you. But when you have a plan that has to go through engineering, and I think as one planning board member mentioned, whether it's 25% of the criteria, we don't know how much that's going to impact the land. And we have intensification of uses on half the parcel now. So I think it's premature to say that this isn't a new application. Maybe you need to wait until the completeness review before you can make that determination. So I would suggest that for those reasons, in addition to the fact that these new uses may require additional review by the planning board, such as subdivision review for these residential dwelling units, that this is a new process and a new
Objection.
application.
There are no residential dwelling units. You're making up facts. Don't make up facts.
So let me just.
Let me just respond to that. The definition of a residential dwelling unit, lawyers can argue about it. I would appreciate it if Mr. Hamilton didn't say that I'm making up facts. That's for the planning board and for potentially a court to determine. We believe it fits the definition. Andy believes it doesn't. It's not making up facts, it's argument.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And thank you, Attorney Chow. And so, I mean, this is kind of what I'm getting at and what I'm struggling with. I'm just looking big picture. You raise a lot of good points. I think we all need to think about. But I think about kind of, what kind of behavior, what are the things that we want to incent as a planning board as part of the process? And, it feels to me like if an applicant comes before us and we raise issues, neighbors raise issues, what you want to incent is a process that allows for iterations. It allows for people to pivot. And again, I think I'm looking at this. I'm ignoring the revisions, the changes that people want to make, because I think you have to do that. I think we have to assume. I would assume that we just have an applicant before us that has put forth a project where people raise concerns and they have iterated and tried to address those concerns as best they can. And if you, and I think that's what we want to incent. But if we conclude that, and maybe there's a substantiality or materiality piece here, I agree, we can think about that. But if you conclude that this is a new application, what you're going to do is you disincent that kind of behavior. You put people, I think somebody mentioned earlier, Hobson's choice. They're going to try to, they get a choice. They either move forward with an application that frankly they don't want anymore, maybe nobody else wants, but they don't want to go through the process again because you're going to make them start over. And so I'm wrestling with again, I'm putting aside the moratorium and all those issues, because I think you have to, and you just have to think about what's the sort of behavior we want to incent and disincent. And I'm concerned that when people, at least from my perspective, listen and they try to make some good faith efforts, if we determine that's a new application, you're going to disincent those kind of behaviors, which is, I think, is what we want to. I would think we'd want to promote. I'll just leave it there.
May I have the opportunity to respond at some point, Mr. Chairman, to what's been said?
You will have. Hold on a second. I have another question for Ms. Chow.
A question for me, and I'd like to respond to Mr. Witham. And thank you for those comments, because I can see that you're taking this seriously, and you are. And I would acknowledge that iterations and projects absolutely are to be expected. And I do think that it is up to the board to decide at some point, do we have such a different project, a wholesale change, that we are embarking on it in a new review procedure and new impacts on the land. And I'm not sure you can make that determination tonight with the information you have before you, because it's not a complete application yet. And so I think that you can consider that. Now, Mr. Hamilton has said the standard should be same developer, same land, same use. It should be the same application in every instance. And I would submit that that's at some point when you look at what's being proposed, that's like saying, well, a duck and a chicken live on the same farm and owned by the same farmer, so a duck is a chicken. Obviously we don't mean that, and it's up to you to decide whether this new plan is so different from the original plan that it should justify new application status. And I'm just not sure that the planning board can make that decision definitively tonight.
I can't hold off much longer, Mr. Chairman, but if you insist, I'll take your guidance.
Go
I'd like to
ahead,
have an
Andy.
opportunity to
Go ahead,
respond.
Andy. Make it as brief as you possibly can, please.
Yep. So patience. When your life is in a knot, patience will untie it. Patience. So there is, to answer Member Wilson's earlier question, there is a moratorium squarely targeted at this project. It has been written in a way by Attorney Chow to
Hold on,
capture.
Andy. I thought we were going to discuss the moratorium.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
gonna
yes,
object to
yes,
this-
yes,
to
we
this
are.
commentary.
Yes, we are, because there was no agreement based upon how we were going to proceed. And what I now see is Attorney Chow gets to argue whatever point she wants. And when I try to respond, I'm interrupted. Fairness and due process would suggest I have the opportunity to complete my observations before I'm interrupted. So could I complete my observations, please?
Go ahead, but you were the one who first said, we're not going to discuss the moratorium, and then you bring it up. That was all my only point, but go ahead.
So the reason I bring up the moratorium is the moratorium is stated so that it applies to projects that were pending or are pending as of August 2, 2021. This project will be captured. If the voters approve it on November 2, this project will be captured. Moratorium is the tool to interpose delay. That's the real purpose of a moratorium. There should be no doubt about that. That's item one. Item two is, as John Adams said, when he was representing British soldiers at a time when he was a patriot, he pointed out to the jury, facts are stubborn things. Facts are stubborn things until you begin to alter them. I found a work of art being created before the boards and my very eyes, and I find it objectionable in the extreme. We will come forward and observe what the retained land restrictions are. We need the opportunity as an applicant to do that. We will do that. As the chair said, we will do that. I object to this notion that you can envisage any number of scenarios based upon whatever Attorney Chow wants to put in your minds. We got to get back to the facts. And she's taken us outside the scope of the present application review to talk about the prior project. She's also taken us into the May 5th amendments. And I have to say, the May 5th amendments are pretty straightforward. If they only address buffers and setbacks, this would be easy. In fact, Cynthia Orcutt in her presentation has already largely addressed the buffer. But we do face Hobson's choices. And here's where we face the Hobson's choice. We're being asked to concede points. The moment we concede that the May 5th amendments are applicable to our project, that's the very moment that someone will spring something that we might not have looked at. And I thought, in fairness, the chairman said, planning board members have said, you're not subject to the May 5th amendments because your project was filed previously. With respect to projects having the same owner and the same applicant, I agree with Attorney Chow. That's what Brown versus Kennebunkport involved. But it didn't involve the same parcel for development. What I find objectionable is the notion that Brown, which Attorney Chow cited in her letter, should be a controlling authority that the board should look at. After Attorney O'Connell said, I don't find that Brown is on all 4 points. It's not on all fours with this project. The reason she said that is because this project does the opposite of what Brown did. Brown, they pulled out of their shorts a phase 2 that involved 47 acres that hadn't been part of phase 1. We're doing the opposite. We're proposing in earnest faith, good faith, and integrity to say to the neighbors, look, we'll take away development as part of this project. We want to show you as abutters, we're sensitive to the impacts that the prior project plan had on your properties. And so we've taken those away. How we show that is something in good faith this applicant will do. But I'm getting the clear picture that unless everything's nailed down tightly as part of this application, any doubt is going to be cast against us. So you should have the presumption as a planning board that we're disingenuous, that Greg Johnston tries to pull a fast one, that we'll all try to pull a fast one as a project team. Nothing happening like that. And I object to the speculation that what we're engaged in is phased commercial campground development. The project and the way it's proceeded is just the opposite. We're reducing the scale. We're reducing impacts. With regard to this skeleton that keeps being brought out of the closet, that the technical folks are going to need to review the technical submittals. Think about stormwater discharge when you have less than a third stipulated. We've stipulated that we will not have kitchens, so there's no way to define us as dwellings. Dwellings requires 3 classic things to be brought together. It requires sleeping quarters, it requires that we have bathroom facilities, and it requires that we have kitchen or cooking facilities. That's the classic triad for a dwelling facility. We've already stipulated that one leg of that 3-legged stool has been taken away, and it will consistently be taken away. And what we say as an applicant team is what we will do. And this planning board knows better than to be cast into the speculative theories that were presented as Mr. Dunbar was asked to roll through plans as though those were being presented tonight. Those were not part of the applicant's presentation. And I object to the notion that you can bring in materials outside the scope of the current review to say, oh, it's all part of the great plan of this applicant. No, what we file as an application is what we need to be judged on. Many of Ms. Chow's comments were outside the scope of this immediate review. Finally, I think it's really hazardous for the planning board to go down the road of saying, you're going to take away the right of an applicant to reduce the scale and scope of their project and subject them to having to start at ground zero. I was surprised. Ms. Chow could have said tonight she wanted to submit us to a pre-application review such that we had to start all over again. That's the type of delay that this project cannot afford, because we will be captured by the plain language of the moratorium if it's voted by the voters. I think that moratorium is not fair play, and I will do everything in my power to make sure there are communications to speak against the passage of that moratorium, but we're at risk. The current moratorium that's been advanced by the select board captures this project as of November 2, if it's adopted, and it rolls it back to August 2nd. So we don't have a lot of time, and we need to get back to the serious work of scheduling the review. And I'd like to come back to that, please, because we've heard fiction and at the very least, alteration of the facts. We get to present facts as the applicant. They get to give their view of the facts, but they can't change the facts and they can't go outside the scope of the application. That's not fair play. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, you can go ahead, or I want to have Ms. Chow respond briefly to Andy's comments.
No.
Jeff, you go first then.
I actually, with all respect to my former profession, I think we've heard enough from council at the moment, and I think the 4 of us need to discuss what we want to do and have some time this evening to make a decision. I've heard all the arguments now I need to hear at this level, and I think we need to decide what the end of the evening, what we're going to do tonight, and are we going to, for instance, I'm not prepared at all to find any sort completeness on what's been done, because we have no paperwork in front of us whatsoever. We have slideshows and so forth, but no paperwork, so we don't have a educated, informed ability to make that determination. So,
Okay,
and that's all.
okay. I would like the opportunity to ask Ms. Chow a question, though, before we go on. Ms. Chow, you mentioned, and then Andy then mentioned the May changes to the campground standards. Can you point specifically to which is they're not complying with? I mean, there's a 50-foot setback in those changes. They had a 50-foot setback on their original plan, and now they're saying they're going to have a 100-foot setback. I don't know what else might come into play here. Could you please explain what you're concerned about that needs to apply?
Well, I would do that, and that's a fair question, except first of all, the concept plan that was submitted was very blurry. I did see that in Greg Johnston's letter that he maintained that there would be a 100-foot buffer. Again, I have a reduced blurry copy of the concept plan, which by my measurements doesn't indicate a 100-foot buffer and so I have a lot of questions about whether or not these would comply with the May 5th amendments.
But would those questions be? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, the truth is, I don't know the answer to that because I apologize.
It's okay.
I got a call from a family member. So the truth is that because we only have a concept plan and we haven't been able to ask questions about this, that it's not clear at all to me that they would be complying with the May 5th amendments.
Mark, I don't think we even need to go to.
What's that, Jeff?
I don't even think we need to go to that issue tonight. I mean, we've heard the concept plan. I think where we are, it's what we want to set forward and schedule so they can file the changes for us to review for completeness. We don't need to argue the merits. I find it very frustrating because I have nothing in front of me that I can listen to the argument and say, yeah, it's 50 feet or 100 feet or whatever it might be, until something is filed and we can look at. We've heard what they want to do.
Keep it to us.
It's interesting for us to hear all this and helps us guide us through, but let's get a filing done. Let's get some dates in and let's have them file what they said they're going to file. You know, what I want to point out, as long as I have the floor for a moment, what I want to point out is percentages are very dangerous. And we've heard from the applicant over and over again, it's only 25% of the completeness questions that need to be addressed by Greg. Andy said it, Greg said it. Fine. However, if you look at the 39 items, which I looked at during some of this, approximately 20 of them are, you know, have you filed a financial letter? Is it in a flood zone? So when you take out all the ones that are mechanical in nature, you're left with like 75% substantive issues, not 25%. So you can look at it from different ways. The other problem I have with not having anything in front of me, they constantly emphasize that they reduced the size, the campground from 154 or whatever down to 55. However, they've shifted all the buildings that were spread out over all the 43 acres down to the lower lot. So it changes the whole complexion of the lower lot. Well, I'm looking at the original filing as you shake your head, Andy. That's number one. Number two, we've gone from what I figured out 42 buildings on the site to 59 buildings, which is an increase of 17 buildings, which is a 40% increase in development of the smaller piece of property. Now, you can argue these percentages all you want and play or move them around, but we need stuff to look at so we can make a decision whether this needs a new application or not. And we can't do that until we set up a filing date so we can look at this material. It's just you can't move things around this way and do simple percentages and make them look, oh, this is very simple. It's not. I'm not saying that we need one. I'm not saying we don't need a new application, deem as a new application. I'm saying I need things to look at before I address that.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm willing to move on like Jeff suggested. Unless Andy or Ms. Chow objects.
I think it's a good idea to move on. Because I think Jeff said, well, it's not really going to be the determination of percentages. We're just trying to illustrate that there isn't a lot changing here. And we hope to show you, Jeff, when we give you the details, that there is not an intensification, as you and Attorney Chow seem to be concluding. But we'll give you the details to support our view that we're not intensifying development on that portion of the parcel. So we'll do that. I do think it's smart to get started with scheduling, and it's smart to keep going. And I don't think you've got the detail that you need to actually make these determinations. So more information is better. I think you get on with getting more information.
Okay, looks like we're moving on. So what we really need to do is decide if this is a modification of an existing application or it requires a new application. Our attorney has also given us another choice to decide to continue with this and make a decision at a future meeting. So I'm just laying those things out there as discussion items at this point. Anybody want to start?
I would note that the court reporter has asked for a 5-minute break. That's pretty reasonable. She's been going for 2 hours, 20 minutes.
That's fine. I wouldn't mind a 5-minute break myself there, Andy. Do we need a motion for that, Jesse?
Oh, we'll make a motion, 5-minute. I move we break for 5 minutes.
Okay, second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Lawson,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Brett,
Yeah.
myself, yes. Okay.
5 minutes.
See you in 5, people.
Yeah. It's fucking ridiculous. What's that about? The campground. I wish could be back down. Well, how come you're not there? It has to be on a Zoom meeting. I saw 2 deer over here. You know the other people's garden? They're eating it. You know what? Up here? Yeah. And on the way here, we saw 6 does and 1 buck. That's why I thought there's gonna be some out here. Oh, baby. No. Nobody cut his either. There's 2 deer here too. Did you see that? You saw that raccoon? His name was Biggie. Because he looked fat. That was a good raccoon. Yeah, well, I got another one. Yeah. Caught another one? What? Caught another one? No, I have another one. I showed him. He took the bait at one of my traps. was not in the line. Yeah. And I got one picture when he did take it. I saw him running off. Now I've got the coyote, but I don't know what to do with it. We just walked up us now. No one does seem to want to fight him.
Just to check in with her, I note that you're back, Tammy. Are you okay? Thanks for giving us a chance to have a break. We all appreciated it.
You're welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Mark.
Are we all back, or? It looks like Brett isn't back yet, and Lawson, so. I have a couple of dogs, I think, that need a 20-minute break.
I hear you, Mark. If I was at home, mine would be crying at me right now.
Well, my wife is down in DC. Well, actually, she's coming back starting today, but so she's been gone for a while. So it's just been me and the animals here. So.
You're primary and sole tender, huh?
Yeah, yeah. What do you have for dogs, Andy? A golden retriever?
I do have a white golden retriever, and
Well,
he's not
used that as an example before. So
yeah, and he's not losing weight, but he's not gaining a whole lot either.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's big.
Yeah, he's about 85 pounds.
Oh, okay.
I apologize. Is our 5 minutes up, Mr. Chair?
Well,
And we're back.
I forgot to look when we started at the break. So
Yes, it's been 5 minutes.
yeah,
It's been
about
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, okay. Good enough. Okay, where were we? We were going to start discussing this, right? And I think I said we need to make some decisions here. And I asked board members to weigh in on this. Who wants to begin? Anybody? Boy, quiet bunch here. Brett?
You know, I think what we need to do is schedule the dates that were discussed a long time ago about filing and when it's going to happen and the next public hearing. And I think that's all we need to do now, because we can't, I'm certainly not prepared to do any sort of completeness vote of any sort whatsoever. Because I have nothing in front of me say, yeah, this is complete. So I would say we keep this on a normal meeting schedule, and if they can't make the 14th for filing and with enough time for the opponents to respond, then I think we make the next date for the completeness review and the first date in October as the public hearing.
So,
Assuming that we have approved at the 26th meeting, I think it is, that we're satisfied with completion. And as someone pointed out early this evening, we may need a peer review done with the new data that's going to come in on the changed completeness issues.
So, but Jeff, are you saying you think this is a modification or it's a new application? That's one of the questions before us.
I have an open mind as to which one it is, and there's no way I can make that determination without seeing what's being changed and how significant it is. Is it substantive? Is it major? Or is it, oh yeah, this is just straightforward. I'm open mind, and until I get to look at something, I have seen nothing.
So then I don't know what the next meeting is. It's not a completeness review, right? Under that theory, Jeff?
Well, the next meeting is the 14th. If we probably might have other matters, just might know that need to be looked at. We can handle some routine business if we have any to handle that date. And they asked for more time beyond that. That takes them to 2 weeks after the 28th, I guess it is, September, to file for or to have filed in a timely fashion 2 weeks before the new completeness and what standards, how they're going to meet the standards in our review. That's all we're looking for. This is simple when you think about it.
Well, but the threshold question is whether it's a continuation of the pending application or a new one.
Yeah, but the threshold question can't be answered till we see what's going to change.
What do you think you need that you don't have right now to make that determination?
Oh, some facts and some how the drain is going to look, how the things they're going to, you know, they went.
No, I don't think the drains really impact whether it's a new application or not.
If you ask a question, Brett, please give the courtesy of let the person who's answering.
Yeah, I know. Yep. So what do you think you need that you don't have now, but other than where the drains are?
I don't know how many times I have to repeat myself. I need to read something that's being changed and see what's being changed. I have no clue because we just saw a quick. We just saw a quick summary of they said their views 25% are changing. I'd like to see what those 25% constitute. And as I said, I went through and found that over half of them are pretty routine. So I know they're not going to be there. I didn't have time at a meeting while I was sitting trying to listen to all people speaking to look at what the other ones might be. I won't know until they file. It's a simple filing. This is straightforward.
But when we find that out through the completeness review, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay.
So we just schedule when they're going to file so we can do the completeness review.
But the completeness review assumes that we're working on the same application.
I don't believe so. Because we don't have enough to make a determination.
So Jeff, what if the application during the completeness review, we deem that it's complete, but wildly different? Is there a mechanism at that point for us? I mean, isn't our choice at the end of a completeness review to either file it complete or not complete?
The last thing I want to hear at this hour is another opinion from another lawyer, but we do know that I think somewhere in our regulations that something substantial and changes that it could be deemed a new application, but there's no definition of substantial. So it goes down to what's reasonable, possibly, or we're locked in, we have to live with it. But I want to see what it is before I'm locked into something. It's a simple request. I mean,
so it sounds like you're suggesting that there is a sort of third option. We could find it complete or incomplete or a new application at the end of the completeness review.
When they do the filing, we'll know whether there's such a change of things that we think it's a new application.
So what things are you thinking about that would suggest it'd be a new application?
I don't know. Because
I think it's fair to tell the applicants what you think.
No, they've already told us 12 items. There's 12 items that might change. Let me see what the changes are. This is very simple. Well,
I don't think it isn't. I don't think it is. It's not as simple as you're suggesting, Jeff. I appreciate it's very simple from your position. I actually don't think it is.
Then it's complicated. Then we got a bigger problem. Okay.
So tell us kind of what you think. I mean, we have the same applicant, same parcel of land, same use. We have a product that's been modified and we'll have feedback from the planning board, the town. What, in that set of circumstances, what would constitute a new application from your perspective, like that you haven't heard from, in terms of the concept here tonight? What do you need?
I don't know what I need until I see what they're going to do. All I have is a picture, a half a paragraph from Greg, and an opinion memorandum from Andy. I don't have any facts in front of me.
You have no facts at all.
No facts.
Wow.
I know. Wow.
Hold on a second, guys, hold on.
I just don't find it credible. I just don't.
Ms. O'Connell, you want to weigh in here and maybe help referee this a little bit? Yeah, another attorney's opinion, Jeff.
Well, I think you're doing a pretty good job of discussing it amongst yourselves and getting the, airing the issues. I mean, my memorandum was just a suggestion of what you might be looking to decide today. I mean, obviously that will change given the nature of the hearing and as the meeting goes on. What I've heard is that there was a lot of discussion about setting a meeting on the 21st, a special meeting, having submissions done by the 14th and having a second completeness review scheduled, and at the same time scheduling a public hearing for either the 28th next meeting date. It's up to you whether you decide at this stage or table whether this is a new application or whether this is still part of the same application. You don't have to decide that tonight, but that's really up to you.
Thank you. Was that helpful to anybody?
It's
Lawson,
helpful
what do you think?
to clarify that we're not deciding tonight whether or not it's a new application. And I guess I'm leaning towards scheduling a completeness review for probably the 21st, maybe the 28th. I'm a little bit nervous about like locking us into a process and then not being able to identify if it's or to determine that we require a new application for some reason. But I'm not that. But I think that I think I'm comfortable with that. I think I'm gonna sort of come around to the fact that once we have more information in front of us, the full application, then we can respond accordingly. And if it turns out that it's a really substantive change, then we'll make that determination. But at this point, it seems like the applicant has told us that they modify the plans. They showed us, talked about the process, which makes a lot of sense. I was very sort of compelled, Brett, by your comments around like incenting revisions. Like that's something that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think with that in mind, I'm sort of inclined to try to adjust our time a little bit. Like that's one of the ways in which I feel like we can incent is that we can say, oh, well, let's have a special meeting. Let's try to like do a completeness review on the 21st so that we could do a public hearing on the 28th. And I think that's where I'm leaning.
Brett and Jeff, want to respond to that, anybody?
Well, Mark, what is your view?
Yeah, good call, Jeff.
You're one of us.
You guys are going to drag me into this, are you?
Can't get away just by by chairing.
Well, I tend to think that it isn't a new application. I think the completeness hearing will determine whether there are issues with it. I mean, at first I thought, this is a major change in this project in my mind, okay? But it doesn't go to the point where it requires a new application or not. And I look at the ordinance, and there's nothing about modification in our ordinance except for something that's already been an application that's already been approved by us. So it seems like, in a way, we should be able to allow for some modifications, despite the size of them, in a way. And maybe we should just let the process go through and let's let them file. I agree with you, Jeff. We don't have a lot of information here. And I want to see more information, and that should be for the completeness review.
All right, I'm on board with that.
I'm ready to try a motion, but I also don't want to cut off conversation if.
Well,
I think scheduling is the only piece left, right? So if we do,
Now, I think we need to make that decision first.
which decision, Mark?
Are we going to just, you seem to think this is a new, well, you want to wait and see if it's a new application. Okay. Okay. Yeah,
at what
it's
point do
scheduled.
when do we make that determination then, if we schedule a completeness? Is it, after the completeness review, and like, how does that work?
Well, if we change the nomenclature and just say adjourn this meeting until they file everything, and so we're not reviewing it as a completeness, we're viewing it as a modification, then we can come back and make a decision. This is so much, it should be a new application. So let's not get hung up on the nomenclature about whether this is a completeness review. Maybe I've been using the wrong word. Maybe we just do adjourn over until we actually have a filing, have some facts in front of us, and then we can look at it, make a determination.
Yeah, I mean, you're pushing things way out for them though, but maybe.
I'm sorry, Brett, what'd you say? I didn't hear you.
Does the time frame still work then, to try to hear it before, they get jammed up?
I don't know, because I don't know what Mark and Lawson seem to be on two different approaches a little bit, so we haven't focused on a time frame. So I'm open to hear.
The real problem is we don't have a lot of information. And I wish they would have provided us with more information tonight, a more complete, quote unquote, concept plan, but that's not the case. Jesse, any opinion here? Let's drag you in on this if you have anything.
We're waiting for a signal.
Jeff, were you implying that you would not necessarily call the meeting a completeness meeting on the 21st, but continue this and then go into completeness on the 21st?
That
Or
was,
are you adding a third meeting?
oh, believe me, I don't want to add a third meeting. The town can't afford our salaries if we do that. I'm trying to listen to what Brett's saying, trying to listen to what Lawson's saying, and Mark, and so I was just trying to change so we're not using the word completeness as much as getting more data in front of us and then do a review of and make a determination which should be a new application because there's too many open issues, or hey, we can keep this moving along.
Right, so what Jeff was suggesting wasn't changing the time crunch, it was just changing the classification of the meeting.
Do we have to publicly notice for a completeness review?
No,
But we do have to, it has to be part of the agenda. So we, but
Yes.
that could, the chair could add that to the agenda.
well, it could be on the agenda, and if you determine ahead of it that you're not going to do completeness, you can make that determination at the meeting.
Okay, so then the other question is it weird to schedule a public hearing for a future date, even if we haven't finished the, we haven't yet gone to the completeness, but
No, you'd have to schedule the public, if you're gonna do a public hearing on the 28th, you would have to schedule it tonight. Because the 14th would be too late. You need a 21-day notice in the newspaper for a public hearing.
and can we notice for a public hearing for an application that's not complete? I think that the answer is yes, but
Yes.
that's what Attorney O'Connell said in her memo, but yeah.
I believe you can.
And if we found the application was not complete, we could cancel that public hearing.
Correct.
It's fallen in place for me anyway.
Me too.
So what I hear you folks saying is submission by the 14th, correct?
Yes.
And what will we do at that meeting on the 14th with the submission?
Nothing.
Nothing,
It's a filing date, Mark.
just a
That-
filing date.
that's a
Okay,
filing
I'm
date.
just trying to get this clear, okay?
Yep.
Let's wait. And then we'll schedule a special meeting for the 21st, correct?
Yes.
And that's when we'll look at completeness,
Or we'll review the application
review
and,
the application. Maybe that's a better way to word it, okay?
you know,
That's
and
what- Get away from the nomenclature.
right. And as part of our review, who knows what we'll determine? We'll determine that it needs a brand new application, or we'll determine that it's incomplete, or that it's complete, or maybe even something else. I don't know. But once we have the application in front of us, we can then determine how to proceed on the
And
21st.
I think we need to give courtesy to the opposition some date between the 14th and the 21st, that they can get their comments on the filing by the applicant in time for us to review before we're sitting down at a meeting
At the 21st, yes.
at 21st. So some date in there, if Amy can just not say anything other than a date, we could, just fix up a calendar and a flow of procedure, which we have the right to set up as a planning board.
Ms. Chow, do you know what would work for you in that case?
I really think a minimum of, well, a week, I think would be appropriate. So, excuse me, got a frog in my throat. But if the submission deadline by the applicant is the 14th, could we have until the 21st? And then the review of the application be on the 28th? So there would still, I guess, I don't know if you would need to have a special meeting on the 21st.
That wasn't the question.
Yeah, that was the question. We were asking Attorney Chow, or I think I understood the question to be sort of, how long would it take for Attorney Chow to respond? And
Amy, if I may call you, Amy.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I think we're trying to work ourselves towards a meeting on the 21st to review the applicant's filing of the 14th. And what I was suggesting, if we have a special meeting on the 21st, courtesy to your team, a filing that if you have, which I'm going to guess you will, opposition points, what date can you file after you see their filing on the 14th?
So you mean between the 14th and the 21st, how much time would we need?
Yep.
And Jesse, are you trying to be recognized, Jesse, or? Yes,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from Jesse before I answer that.
17th.
I just wanted to add that typically you request comments from the opposition before a public hearing, not before a completeness review. So if the applicant submitted plans to you by the 14th, they would have until the 21st to submit their comments for the meeting on the 28th. Their comments normally aren't heard at a completeness review.
That's a good point.
But if, I guess that's a fair point. And that would be helpful in terms of if we decide to do some engineering review of the application, I think having a week is sort of, less than a week would be challenging. I guess I would ask to the extent that if I'm hearing the board correctly in saying that on the 21st, you're going to review the application and you might determine one of two things. A, it's incomplete or complete, and B, it's a new application or it's a continuation. And so to the extent that you might be looking at this as new versus a continuation, we would like a chance to submit something in writing. I would submit something in writing in response, but before the 21st, so you could still continue to have a special meeting on that day. I guess I don't, looking at it.
The parties have already submitted, Mr. Chairman, the parties have already submitted on factors that go to whether it's a new or modification of a pending application. How many bites of that apple are we going to take? That's going to prolong the review process. I think I agree with Attorney Chow that a week is enough for technical folks to review submittals. And I think it should go to the hearing on the 28th and the completeness review or whatever you're going to do on the 21st. If they file on the 21st, we could say we'd be disadvantaged if you're going to be taking up the substantive review on the 21st. That's got to be just a completeness exercise because we wouldn't have had a chance to respond to the comments. So one of the things I want to get before the board as a procedural approach is applicant has the burden. So applicant gets to submit and gets to respond once the opponents respond. So that's a pretty standard approach. And we've been kind of sliding away from that, but I'm okay with this. If Greg submits on the 14th, there's a completeness review at which the interested persons are not expected to have to submit anything. They can be heard. And then on the 28th, we have the substantive review. If the completeness has been done on the 21st, I think that can work.
What do you think, folks? I'll entertain a motion if you think that's the way we should do it.
I just want to be, can I just make,
Sure, go ahead.
or just want to make sure I heard Andy correctly. If you're having a special meeting on the 21st to review the application and make a completeness determination, and then also decide whether it's a new application or a continuation, I assume at that meeting that I and others could be heard, although that's not a public hearing, about that.
I
If you're
would
not-
think so, yeah.
That's acceptable to us.
One minor concern, otherwise I think the agreement holds, Mr. Chairman, and that is we don't want to kick the can down the road because we keep getting into this question of having to defend. The default rule is that we are strictly a modification of the current application until somebody finds that we're not. So if we're going to be at risk as part of getting engineering submittals together, one of the reasons we wanted to present the concept plan to you, so we wouldn't be at risk anymore, and you'd make a determination as to whether we're a continuation of the current application or a new application. I think we're okay because we understand the default rule, and I think it's unlikely you're going to determine that we're a new application. But if you think you're going to put us at risk 3 weeks out, we'd rather hear it now rather than later.
Thank you.
That's what he gets paid the big bucks for, is to make that risk analysis. I think what's been suggested has some a flow that sort of works for the applicant and for the whole process, that's conscious of all the elephants in the tent that we don't want to even acknowledge are in the tent, whether it's the moratorium, et cetera, and the May 5th thing. So, I mean, there's been an attempt to keep those out of the tent, but they keep falling into the tent. I think what we've come up with is a approach that might avoid that. Andy points out there's a risk. That's something he has to analyze as the attorney for the applicant.
Right. Lawson?
Sounds to me like we basically have an agreement.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I don't want to say anything else.
Okay. We'll take a motion then.
All right, I'll jump into the deep end and see if I can swim. So I move that we schedule let's see, what am I doing? That we ask the applicants to submit on September 14th the sort of any remaining information, any changes to the
Lawson, hold on a second. Could you repeat that? You broke up, at least in my
at
my end.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me now, Mark?
Yeah, I can. Yes.
Okay. So I move that we ask the applicant to submit any changes to the application on September 14th or by September 14th, and schedule a special planning board meeting on September 21st to review the application.
And how
Maybe I
about-
should stop there and then do a separate motion for the public hearing, or should I do it all at once?
You can stop there.
All right, I'll
Yeah,
stop there.
yeah, let's stop there. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes it easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Seconded, yep.
Okay, we have a motion second on the table to schedule that the applicant submit or have the applicant submit any changes to the application by September 14th and schedule a special meeting for September 21st to review that application. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
the changes? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any discussion? Jesse?
Jesse wants to say something.
Yeah,
What time and is it by Zoom or not?
I think that it should be at our regular time, which is 6 in the Harvey Kelly meeting room.
is that an amendment?
Assuming the second agrees. Yeah,
Do we have any, do we have, what's the what's the limit to that room for the public? Jesse?
Jesse
I
would know.
have to check, but I mean, tonight we have 47.
No,
47.
right now we had 47. Earlier on, we had 63 or something like that.
Yeah. I think we had 63 last night.
Last night, we had quite a few, there were more people, there were a lot of people standing last night, so I counted about 60 last night,
Yeah. That's about,
max.
Do we need to be concerned of any overall, oh God, I hate talking about this, COVID mandates come down about masks?
I feel like if there are mandates or changes for the town that happen between now and the 21st, yeah, we'll respond to those. And if we need to adjust the meeting to a different place or move it to Zoom, we can do that. But then at this
Yeah.
point, knowing what we know, it makes sense to schedule it in person at the town hall.
And I, as chairman, have the option to make a change to the community center as well,
Right.
if it looks like it's going to be overcrowded. So as long as there's no conflict there, I'm guessing, which I doubt if there would be.
May I ask a question as to whether or not this board has in the past or would have hybrid meetings, meaning have an in-person meeting but allows participation by Zoom?
We
Well-
have, but we do have a remote participation policy now in effect. And there are specific conditions where that's allowed. And I think it means that one of the board members has to be not present for a specific reason. Is that correct, Jesse?
yes, you do have the option to allow the public to participate by Zoom, but it's up to the board.
Okay, okay. Ms. Chow, you're saying you don't want to make the drive up?
I will make the drive up, but if there's a possibility of remote participation by Zoom, and that's something I'll discuss with my clients, I'd like to have that option open if that's possible. And I
Okay.
wonder if there are other members of the public who would feel similarly, that they would like to participate, but maybe not make the trip to the Harvey Kelly room.
I for one, either prefer all in person or all Zoom. The hybrid models or the hybrid meetings we've had have been a little difficult because we can't really see everybody and that sort of thing, but that is a possibility. Okay, where are we? We have a motion on the table, right?
Got a motion on the table for the scheduling.
So in person, 6 p.m. the 14th at the Harvey Kelly
The
meeting.
20,
room,
the
and
21st.
the 21st,
Oh, right.
both dates at
Yes.
6 p.m. in the Harvey Kelly meeting room, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Any discussion, further discussion?
Mark, you said that filing by the 14th with a meeting of the 21st.
Right, yeah, oh, yeah, okay, yes. I was thinking, we're gonna have a meeting on the 14th anyway, so I was
Yeah,
gonna have
right.
myself there.
But it's also a filing day. Yes.
Yes, filing date. Okay. All in favor? Lawson,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Brett,
Yes.
myself, yes, 4-0. Okay, now we need to schedule the public hearing.
I make a motion that we schedule a public hearing for the Acadia Wilderness Lodge application for September 28th at you think 5, Jesse? At 5 o'clock via Zoom.
With filings by the 21st.
With filings from the opposition, and then but then doesn't the applicant have a chance to respond to the opposition's comments? How does that?
At the meeting?
They have until the 28th.
Okay, so they can like show up to the meeting with their
Yes.
response.
We would provide both written submittals and the response on the 28th, correct?
Okay. Great. So I make a motion that we schedule a public hearing to Acadia Wilderness Lodge with for Tuesday, September 28th, 5 o'clock via Zoom, with filing submission from the public, sort of the responses from the public by the 21st.
Can I, if you're going to be allowing the applicant a written response deadline of, or a chance to respond in writing, which I don't think is what the planning board has provided in the past. And I don't have a problem if you do that, but I would ask that I be given a copy prior to the 28th, even if it's a day prior.
Well, I was going to address that slightly differently. I was going to ask Andy, since we're going to be by Zoom, can we do it the day before by electronic so we all can read it before we have the meeting the next day? Would that be?
Yeah, I think that's sensible, Jeff, and I'm just going to look to my colleagues, Cindy and Greg and John here to my right, and just say, could we get our filings done by the 27th so that we file electronically for the meeting on the 28th? Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
I think we're all in agreement. Yes, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we have that early in the day on the 27th, rather than the end of the day?
We'll do our best, Amy, but I can't guarantee much further.
How early do you want it, Amy?
Before sunrise.
At the risk, yeah, I would, but at the risk of negotiating, 12 noon would be most appreciated. How about I leave it at that?
You can do that, right, Andy?
Yeah, best efforts for noon time, and if we can't, we'll definitely do it by 2 o'clock.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion on the table, right? Schedule public hearing on the Acadia Wilderness Lodge application at 5 o'clock on the 28th by Zoom with filings by the 21st. Is that the entire motion? Okay. And any discussion?
You need a second.
Oh, and let's take a second then. Thanks, Jesse. I'll second it. Any discussion?
I may have missed it. What's the basis for the Zoom piece? Is it just a lot of people, or in light of the policy from the state?
I think so, yeah.
I thought we discussed for this particular application, we're being consistent because we started on Zoom and we're moving through on Zoom. It's the only one we're handling that way in the town. And that, I thought we had discussed that as a board, sort of.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that especially for public hearing, where we want to be hearing from the public, which could mean dozens of people, dozens of voices, that will work better via Zoom. I guess I feel like that's different from the application review meeting on the 21st, where I don't anticipate hearing from dozens of people. I do anticipate hearing from the applicant and.
Hey, I understand that. I'm just trying to make sure we're complying with state law.
Right.
That's not what the policy says. So if you don't follow the policy, you're actually opening us up to a due process complaint. So I think we need, whatever we're gonna do needs to be consistent with that policy, which is based on state law.
So the way I phrased it last week, talking about this meeting, was
The
that we
reason
were,
but the reason we did this meeting this way is because it was scheduled before we passed that policy.
okay, that's a good point. Yep.
Yes.
And so, that policy evinces a preference by, I would argue, by the legislature, by the state to, as best we can, have these in person, because there's a different level of connection and discourse in person as opposed to Zoom.
Yeah.
So that's why that policy contains very limited exceptions for Zoom. And I think if you just we don't meet those exceptions and you just schedule it for Zoom, you're not complying with state law.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Right.
I know, I get it. I do a lot of Zoom meetings. But I read through that policy, in fact, I think, I don't have it in front of me, it states at the top, there's a preference, it says something, there's a preference for board members to be there.
Right.
And then the public can participate Zoom if a board member is participating via Zoom. But otherwise, I don't.
That's amended to be at the community building, community center. Gives us plenty of room.
That makes sense, Mark. Yeah.
And again, I get it. I'm not trying to, cut people out. It's just we need to comply with state law.
And I think I'm sort of compelled by the argument that actually, like, it elevates the discourse to be in person. That we're not trying to cut people out. We're actually trying to, like, engage more directly, and doing that in person is a good move, both for the law and for the planning board.
We should look at whether, and I don't know if maybe Councilor O'Connell, the hybrid of where they're in person, the public can be remote. I don't know. As I recall, that it provided for that if a board member was not there. But if the board members are there, I don't think that provides for that.
I checked with Maine Municipal,
Yeah.
and let me see if I can just pull it up real quick.
We're getting a lot. I bring it up because we're getting a lot of chat. I don't know if people have seen the chats. There's a lot of questions about that.
The law requires that at least one board member have to join by remote access in order for the public to be able to join by remote access. And that one member has to have valid reasons under the law why they have to participate remotely, because
That's what I thought.
like it or not, the preference is for in-person. So
So I asked, on July 28th, I asked MMA Legal, if the board could allow to have a remote participation option for the public when all board members are in person at the meeting. And their response was, that is and has always been an option. What the new law does not allow is barring the public from attending in person if the board itself is meeting in person. In other words, you can't prohibit the public from attending in person if the board itself is meeting in person. You can, however, give the public the option of remote attendance, even if the board is meeting in person, as long as the public can also attend in person.
We could do a hybrid then. We could have a.
That was their response.
People can come to the room if they want, but we can also, I guess, have a laptop set up. It's kind of clunky. It doesn't work very well, but we could do that.
Yeah.
Dusty, does the town own a projector?
I was just gonna ask the same thing.
Yes,
Okay.
Is there a way we can project it on the screen?
I'm sure we
Dawson
can
says yes. Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah, I think that is worth endeavoring to do, so
Yeah, I
that the
agree.
board can see the people who are participating.
Yeah, otherwise the laptops are, otherwise I guess we'd all have to have a laptop ourselves and,
Right.
yeah.
So would we still want to use the community center, or would we want to go to the town office then?
I think the town office would probably be fine if you're having a Zoom option.
We do a hybrid. I think the town office is probably fine.
Okay,
Yes.
and we can always move it or I can always have it moved if it looks like there's going to be an overflow crowd. I too am worried about the rise in COVID cases, okay? And who knows where we're going to be here in another month. So
let's amend the motion to include the public option Zoom. Is that
Okay.
okay, everyone?
okay, let's vote this motion down and put a new motion. Let's make it clean. How's that
Sounds great.
sound, everybody? Okay.
Sounds great.
All in favor, Lawson,
Nope.
Jeff,
No.
Brett,
No,
myself, no. Okay, new motion. Lawson, you still at it?
I'll do my best.
Are you still game?
I am game. I make a motion that we schedule a public hearing for the Acadia Wilderness Lodge Campground, Acadia Wilderness Lodge, I guess, for Tuesday, September 28th at 5 o'clock in the Harvey Kelly meeting room with a public Zoom option and a filing deadline of September 21st for comments from the public.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and second on the table to schedule a public hearing on Acadia Wilderness Lodge for September 28th. That's a Tuesday, 5 o'clock in the Harvey Kelly meeting room, along with having a Zoom option for the public and with filings by the 21st. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to,
Okay.
do you want to add the amendment and also filings by the applicant by the 27th at 12 noon?
So I would, if Andy's offering, I think we should accept it.
Yes.
Thanks, Andy.
Great.
Okay.
With responses from the applicant by the 27th at noon.
And with responses by the applicant by the 27th. Okay,
At noon?
at noon, yeah.
high noon.
Shockingly, I don't object.
Okay. I'll call for a vote unless there's any more discussion on that. Lawson,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Brett,
Yes.
myself, yes, 4-0. Okay, we're done there. Now we have, actually, we have to open this public hearing. Correct, folks? And I know a lot of people want to weigh in. It's late. You know that we're going to be looking at more information provided by the applicant and considering that at a future meeting as for completeness and discussion, and that we'll then schedule a public, or we have already scheduled a public hearing after that date. So I'm going to ask folks to hold your comments until then, although technically or legally you don't have to, but I'm going to ask you to do that, please. So that being said, we'll
Couldn't we-
open the public. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can we adjourn the public hearing without comment?
We've scheduled it. I think we have to, when I talked to Diane today, I think we have to kind of open it and close it. We have to allow them comment, correct, Diane?
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion because you didn't just adjourn the hearing in general, that you started you've met and you've started and it was advertised as a public hearing, that you should allow, a limited opportunity.
Okay.
I know, Jeff. Okay, I'll call the public hearing on Acadia Wilderness Lodge open at 8:14. Anybody care to comment? Thank you, folks. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay,
Hands up, Mark.
yes, sir.
I just want to make sure that people have the ability to unmute themselves if they want to. I guess they do because I have the ability. Okay, all right, we're good.
There are.
Just procedurally, Mr. Chairman, if I can
Sure.
suggest so that the public doesn't feel that they've been cut off, could you adjourn this public hearing, if that's your pleasure, to September 28th so that the public understands they will get a further opportunity to comment and it'll be clear in the form of the motion and action on the motion.
Are you, do you want to use the word adjourn or continue, Andy?
Either one.
We've already scheduled a public hearing for the 21st, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 28th, I mean.
28th, right. I'd either continue it to the 28th or adjourn the public hearing to the 28th.
I move that we continue the public hearing to the 28th.
Second,
Okay, motion is second on the table to continue the public hearing until the 28th. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Brett,
Aye, yes.
Jeff,
yes.
Lawson,
Yes.
myself, yes. Great. Okay, we still have some business to get to, right?
Yeah, adjourning, ending.
We have to adjourn, but also don't we have to schedule that 14th February, September 14th meeting.
February.
I wish it were February. I lost my agenda here.
I'll make a motion to schedule our next planning board meeting. Well, I guess, are there any CEO issues? That's the next thing on the agenda.
No.
Okay. All right, I'll make a motion to schedule our next planning board meeting for Tuesday, September 14th at 6 o'clock in the Harvey Kelly meeting room.
I have a second.
Second,
I had a second, I'm sorry.
yes, second.
Okay, motion is second on the table to schedule the next meeting for the 14th in the Harvey Kelly meeting room at 6 o'clock. All in favor, Brett,
Yes.
Lawson,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
myself, yes. Okay.
Wait a
now-
minute, Beth
Oh,
needs to vote.
What, oh, okay. It's getting late, folks, come on. Lawson,
She's back in now, you know.
Lawson,
Yes.
yeah, Brett,
We're going back around again? Yes, yes.
oh, I thought we did do it.
Well, what Jeff said is Beth needs to be able to vote. Beth
You gotta
Dodd.
call on Beth too.
I agree.
Oh, Beth,
Yes.
okay, Beth agrees, okay, yeah, she can vote on that. Beth, you want to make a motion to adjourn?
All right,
Also
yes, I'll
move.
make a motion.
How
I
about
make a
second,
motion,
Beth?
we adjourn.
Okay, how about a second for Beth, since she patiently waited out the whole thing?
Jeff seconded.
Okay, a motion and second on the table to adjourn. All in favor, Beth,
Aye.
Brett,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Lawson,
Yes.
myself, yes. Okay, thanks, folks. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Thank you. Bye.